Switch test. Hey, just making sure that you guys can see me. Everything's coming in as it should. And we're going to be starting up really soon here at 2 p.m. We'll be a little bit pre-roll. Okay. Still getting, I'm hearing a little bit about feedback. I want to make sure you don't have any. Are you still getting feedback? Okay, we only have one mic set up, so just hold with me for a second. I'll make sure that is all shut off. Okay, great. There shouldn't be any feedback, but if you're hearing anything, let me know. It's just a single mic setup here. Okay. Let's see. And we'll get rolling in just a little bit here. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. All right, great. So I think we're going. Okay, hold on. I got you. Hold on for a sec. There we go. There we go. All right, cool. Can you hear me now? And are you getting any feedback? If anyone wants to comment on that. Oh yeah, and I have some comments here. You can upgrade safely. It may be a point version behind because Unity updates their versions a lot. So I got a question about if you're seeing a thing when you bring the project in, the project file, about it being a point version earlier. When I created this project for you guys, it was on 2019.311. And by the time I got it finished, they've already released the new version. That's just how Unity is. They move really fast, but it won't impact anything. It's just a small point version, so you can safely upgrade if you're using the newest one that you just downloaded today. That's going to work totally fine. You can just upgrade the project. It shouldn't do anything to anything. And those little point versions usually don't break, and then when they release a big version, it breaks stuff, and you have to be careful when you upgrade. All right, great. Oh, sorry, and we're still testing, so I'm going to switch back to our start screen here. Okay. Oh, okay, great. Okay, great. All right, great. Perfect. This is perfect. Okay, great. So I'm gonna start this stream and start up again. Good. Oh, okay. All right, perfect. So it's almost 2 o'clock. We're gonna be starting up very, very soon. If you haven't gotten the files already, they should have been sent out in the PIGSquad emails, but there are project files for this one, it is a link. We can get a link out onto the Twitch channel as well if you need it, but it's basically just some assets and some things to get you up and running. There are some scripts in there that I put together so we don't have to deal with too much coding today. Or really any. This is not going to be a code focused day, but it is mostly stuff that you can just get straight out of vanilla Unity. So there's nothing super special about this setup, and I'll go into that, but we're basically going to use the standard Unity template, and we'll talk about what that means. But we're trying to keep things really simple in the setup today and just get into work and building a game in the game loop. So yeah, the meetup page. Yeah, Worthwhile Panda, that's good. Saying there's a getting the files from the meetup page, so you should be able to find it there as well. And it looks like, oh yeah, Mboffin, thank you. Thanks, man. Yeah, so he's posted a link to the drive. If you look at that link, you can download the files if you don't have them already. It's like 200 megabytes, so it's like a little bit of a lift, but for Unity packages, that's pretty small. So about the smallest we could get it. All right, so here we are. We are starting up. It's 2 p.m. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Memorial Day weekend. Thanks for coming out. And just to let everyone get started and kind of get up and running, we're gonna just have a little bit of we're gonna just wait a little bit to make sure everyone can get in here. But basically just what we're going over today is it's an introduction to Unity, but it is actually going to be a little bit of something for everyone. So if you're a completely new user, you're going to learn a lot. If you're a beginning user, you're going to learn a lot. But if you're an intermediate user, there's actually some tips and tricks and some things you might not have known or thought about, because we're also going to be just looking at the idea of how do you make a game. And so part of that's, you know, technical, like how do you do things. But the other part of it's, you know, like what's a good thing to focus on, and like how can you approach it so it actually gets done, right? So Unity in general is big, right? It's a huge platform, and you can use it for so many things. Like you don't even have to make games, right? You can make games. You can make VRAR. You could make ArcViz pre-visualizations. You know, you can like make your house and send it. You know, use it for real estate stuff. There's so many things that you could do, but today we're just really going to focus on game and game loop. So, excuse me, the idea of the game loop being like a whole circle, a whole cycle where you have a beginning and a middle and an end, and we're going to focus on that. So it's going to be about, you know, how do you get that and get it working and make it fun and make it enjoyable and something you like before you get you know, you run off into the weeds. I'll probably bring that up again because it's really common. You know, I'm guilty of this too. But you know, when you start a project, it's really fun to like have an idea and a goal, and then you just start tinkering on things, and you start working on things, and then you just kind of tangent and then tangent and then tangent. And you're like, well, what if I did this, and what if I animated that, and well, wait, what if I could do this and cast array over here? And eventually you just kind of realize that like a few weeks have gone by and you haven't really gotten any closer to your goal. So part of the thing we'll do is just like a good approach. It's an approach that I like for prototyping first, and making sure that you are actually like getting to the stage where it's like, hey, this is a game, before you are like, you know what, I need to like polish this guy's fingernail. So so we're gonna do a little bit of that, how to prioritize. So anyway, this is Unity Hub. I just have up here, and again, it's in the chat links. It's also in the meetup information. It's all in the PIGSquad pages. But if you download this project, the project files, the Unity package, it'll help you get started. And I named it appropriately, Socially Distant. So this is our package, Socially Distant. And the package was built again when current Unity was 2019.3.11, but they have since released a small update. So if you have brand new version of Unity, it may ask you about upgrading this project. That is totally fine. It won't hurt anything. It's totally gonna just upgrade fine, because this is just like a tiny little point release on Unity. So don't worry if, I think they're on 0.3, 0.11, or 0.12 now, or 0.14, or whatever they are. There's like a new release every week, so hard to keep up. But anyway, we're gonna boot this up. Well, if you have another version, I'm getting a comment about how do we open this up if we don't have a different version. So if you've downloaded the newest version of Unity, you can open this. There's no problem. It just, when you do open it, it's going to ask you, do you want to open it in the new version? And then you say yes. And then it's going to say, oh, we need to upgrade it. Do you need to do that? And you say yes. And in this case, upgrading is not really going to be doing anything. It's just going to be marking it for that newest version. So you're good. Yeah, the current newest release, Wheel Rainstorm is saying that 2019.3.14, totally fine. like I said, they release a new point version every week about, so you can just bring this project into that. It'll upgrade. It'll be fine. It won't take any time. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of people are on the new. I'm just back by a point version, but it doesn't affect any of the features, so you're all good. So anyway, I think we're ready to get going here. So let's start digging in. In the project Socially Distant, once you add it up, once you get into Unity Hub, and again, I do recommend using Unity Hub rather than installing the different versions, because it can track all your installs. You can always add the newest install. You can see I'm on 3.11, but you guys are probably on 3.14, which is again totally fine. And you can just open it up in whichever of those newer versions. Yeah, so this broadcast will be available to watch later. Yeah, we are recording it so that you guys can see it later, for sure. Great question. And we're gonna open this up. And it's gonna do its thing, and then we're gonna dig in here. So again, the goal today is to figure out what a game loop is, figure out the Unity interface, build a prototype that works, and then add all that finesse that can make it like level it up even more. So you can actually see as I come in here, it's giving me this, do you want to get the 2019.3.14? So it's okay. Either one of these versions will work totally fine. And if you come in here, you're gonna have a start here scene, hopefully. If you aren't starting in the start here scene, you can see that there are assets in this project area here, and these are all the assets that are actually on your computer. And then the ones here up in the hierarchy are not, they're virtual assets. So these are just like in your game scene, but these things are actually files on your hard drive. So if you open up the one called scenes, you can see there's a finished game scene and a start here scene. We are gonna start at the start here scene. But just to show you what we're aiming to do, the start scene here, I'm gonna show you the game that we're gonna work on. So this game is called The Last TP, and it is a stealth game where you have to sneak inside of a grocery store and find the last TP roll. And like all good stealth games, there's bad guys looking for you, and you don't want them to find you, so you got to sneak around and hide. And there's only one toilet paper in here, so we're going to use a view cam to kind of sneak by these guys, see if we can avoid them. There we go. I'll like hide in the corner here, see if you can catch me. And I got to find that TP roll. It's somewhere, but there's only one of them. So this is the game we're going to be building. Where is it? It's somewhere. Let's see. And we're going to be looking at a bunch of different things. We're going to be looking at enemy navigation. We're going to be looking at sensing for the player. We're going to be looking at, of course, oh no. Oh, that was a close call. There it is. There's the TP roll. Okay, I found it. Oh no. Oh no, I was so close. Oh no, okay. Come on, I gotta get away. Man. Okay. Well, no TP for me this time. So this is the game we're gonna build. And what a game needs to have a full game loop is it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has to be playable. There has to be a goal, and then there has to be a way to win it and to lose it. And then this is actually an important one. You have to be able to restart it. So that can be really simple. You can see we're doing this all in one scene. There's no fancy menus. There isn't a bunch of complicated stuff, but we're still able to test the whole game. We're able to see if it's fun or not. So that's really important. But anyway, we're not going to start here. We're going to start at the start here, scene, in your scene folder, and we're going to go over a few things. So I know that some of you are familiar with Unity, so I'm going to keep this brief, but I do want to just go over a couple quick interface things for people that might not be as familiar. So you may not have the exact same layout that I have here. There's some different layouts that you can do. All windows in Unity can be dragged and dropped, and you can also docket them together. You can put the folders next to each other, and then they will they'll be next to each other, and you can group things. So there's all these different windows. You can find all the windows under Windows. There's quite a lot of windows, for animation and scene and all these things. But the ones that are the most important right now are the scene view, which is where you're going to edit stuff, and then the game view, which is where you're going to preview your game. So if you want to kind of explore a couple of quick layouts, there's a layout option in the top right, and you can see that there's some that they've set up for you already. You can also save your layouts for your own. So you can see I have the SUP and some other layouts that I enjoy. So I definitely recommend, once you get all your panels and stuff how you like them, go to layout and save the layout and give yourself a name for the layout so that you can keep it later. So let's call this one Pigs, because why not? So now you can see I can always switch back to the Pigs layout when I need to. Okay, so if you come into the scene here, this is like a typical 3D navigation scene. So if you have a Mac, just know I'm on a PC, so I'm going to be saying PC hotkeys. But if I say, command, you can imagine I'm saying command if you need to know those things. But I'm on a PC, so I'm going to be talking about control and all those kind of things. So if you have a mouse, actually, you can zoom with your mouse wheel, and then you can middle mouse click and drag to pan, and then you can right mouse click and drag to zoom around. You can also hold down Alt if you're on a PC again, and you can use your left mouse to rotate around. And so you can use the Alt if you want to, but you can actually just kind of use your one hand in your mouse if you want to, but by using the middle mouse and the right. So that's pretty cool. So that's how you would navigate the scene. And then there's a couple of really useful things. So I've built a really basic level for you, and I'm going to show you how you can build that too. This is the whole idea here, is to keep it really simple. We're going to start with a prototype. So we don't need all the fancy things. We don't need all the shopping carts and stuff yet. We just need a little box with maybe some pillars for walls, and keep it really simple. So to make these assets, I am just using free stuff off of the asset store. So if you go into this assets bin, which is again in the project window, these are real things, like real files on your hard drive. And if you look at these are not default. I created all these folders. So you can just right click and you can say create. You can create all kinds of things, but folders are really useful because actually organizing your file is really important. So once you start building a project, at first it seems like I'll just put stuff everywhere, I'll figure it out later. But the truth is, if you keep yourself organized from the get-go, it's really easy to actually build stuff, and it gets really hard if you don't stay organized. So typically, these are the types of folders that I create. I think this one here is really useful. So I make a third-party folder anytime I'm going to use assets like off of the asset store, so I can know like what stuff I made and what stuff I'm importing and using from somebody else. It's just nice to keep that handy, so that it doesn't get all super hard to find stuff and later when it's all messy. So we're actually just using a few assets here from the asset store. Again, these are all free assets. If you go to the asset store and type in any of these names, you'll find them there for free. So I've included them here in your project just to make things easier, but just know, like, I'm not doing anything weird. This is vanilla Unity. This isn't high definition render pipeline, low definition render pipeline. It's just Unity with standard pipeline. So there's no special settings here. Just because I want you to know, like, you don't have to get all tied up in that stuff. You can just start with like standard vanilla, and you can still make anything you want to. So just keep that in mind. So the biggest thing that we're using here is this one. We have this Asset Store Originals, which is a Unity original, and they have these things called snaps prototypes. So if you type in snaps, there's actually a bunch of these little kits. And we're using the Office one because I thought that'd be kind of like a grocery store. But you can see they actually have a bunch of these different ones and different themes and stuff. So this is a great way to get like pieces for building your scenes out. We're going to have another live stream that is about ProBuilder and using ProBuilder and ProGrids to also quickly prototype stuff, which is great. But in this one, we're not going to do that. We're just going to use classic little pieces of geometry that we snap together. So that's why these are called snaps. And if you see in my scene view, when I click on that, it's going to go to that object. And here's a couple of great tricks. If you press F for focus, the key F, it'll zoom you in right on this object so that you can focus on it, which is really, really good way to get around the scene if you're getting lost. So just F, that's a really useful one. And then there's a couple of great keys here for building. So if I wanted to build out a level here, if you press Control D, that's duplicate, or Command D, I guess, if you're on a Mac. But Control D, that's duplicate, and you can see I can drag this out, and I can make a bunch of these and snap them together. So you probably know some of those hotkeys, but here's a couple of really useful ones. If you click on one of these arrows, it'll just go to that axis, whereas if you click on like the block here, it'll go to the axes, more axes. But if you hold down Control and then click on it, it'll snap it to increments. So it'll snap it to like scene increments. So that's actually really useful. So if I grab this and snap, I'm holding Control to snap, and I'm pressing Control D to duplicate, and then I'm pressing Control and I'm snapping it, you can see that I can really easily snap these together. So I can click and then hold Shift and click, and that'll select both of them. Control D, and then now I'm holding Control again, snap, 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 boing. So you can quickly see I can quickly build out a level this way. And that's all that I was doing to build this. So you can see the walls are just pieces, and everything in here is just a little piece that's snapped together from that snaps kit. So easy way to build a level, keep it easy, no reason to make it hard. If you want to delete something, you can just press delete to get rid of it. So all that kind of stuff. So I know that's like a little bit housekeeping types of stuff, and I think we can dig in a little bit more here. But if anyone has any interface questions as we go along, put it in the chat, and other people in the chat, or I can call it out, and we'll talk about it. I don't want to use up too much of the time on just going through the interface, but as we go along, if there's anything that confuses you, please put it in the chat, and we will get an answer for you, so you're not you're not confused. All right, so now that we have this thing going on here, let's dig into the actual game. So again, just like with the project files, I like to keep stuff in the scene nice and organized, because it just makes life really easy. You can see as I open up this floors, you can see there's a ton of floors here. There's so many of them. So because of that, there's hundreds of these objects, and suddenly it's going to get harder and harder to find stuff. So to deal with that, I keep things into containers, and this is the most useful object in Unity. So if you click the little plus thing here, you can also just right click in a blank area. You can create different objects, right? There's all kinds of objects, but there's also a create empty. And if you create empty, it creates an empty game object. It has nothing. It's not a thing. It's just a transform. So it's just like a point in space. And this is actually a great way to organize stuff. So if you use this as the parent to objects, then it's going to be an easy way to organize them and basically treat them like folders. One thing to keep in mind, like let's say I create a 3D object cube. So now I have a cube, and here's my cube, and I'll move this up here. So if I get this cube just where I want it, and then I put it in the game object is not zeroed out. So then when I go to zero this back out, like so this parent object, and let's rename this, let's call this cubes, because this is holding all the cubes. And then if I recenter it, you can see like, whoa, it's gone, where'd it go? Well, it just like went to some random place because it wasn't centered. So to avoid that, what you can do is get your cube where you want it, and before you parent it, just make sure your folder objects, these empty game objects, are zeroed out. So if you just right click on the transform thing right there, if you right click on it, there's a reset. Click that, it zeroes it all out. And now if you put the thing under there, that's great. So I recommend for things that you use for organization, I always recommend zeroing them out by just right clicking and going reset. Okay, so now here's a couple of basic things that are really good to know in case you don't. So prefabs. So we have this prefabs folder in here. What's a prefab? So the way that Unity works is it's dealing with real files on your computer. So that's the stuff down here in the project. So these are real things. And then it's dealing with virtual objects or instantiated objects that aren't real. They're just like in the scene, but they're just in your game scene. They're not on your hard drive anywhere, right? So you can also kind of create assets out of these things in the scene, so that you can share them across scenes and stuff like that, and that's a prefab. So if you have a cube here, and then you press Control D to duplicate, and you move it, and you say, okay, I have another cube here, and I have another cube here, and then you say, oh, you know what? I wish all of these cubes were, a little bit wider. And by the way, in case you don't know, if you just go to this top window on the top left, you can see all your transform tools. There's translate, rotate, and scale. You can also push the keys on your keyboard, W, E, R for those. So W, E, R to go through the transforms. So if you have this scale one, like what if you're like, well, I want all my cubes to be like wide like this. Well, now you're like, oh, okay, all right. And then this one needs to be that wide. Oh, okay. And then that one needs to be that wide. Then you have to kind of like line it up, and that can be annoying, right? So this is where prefabs come in. So if you if you add a cube here, again, we'll go 3D object cube, I'll put it in the cubes folder, go down there. All right, so now I say, okay, I want my cube to be like yay big, okay, and then I want it to be all squashed. All right, great. And then now I can duplicate it, and it's the same problem, right? I have them how I want, but as soon as I want to make a change, now I have to make that change on all of them, and it gets annoying. So instead, I'm going to take my cube and I'm going to drag it down into my prefabs folder. It's going to create a prefab, and it's going to turn blue. So you can see in the scene here, it turned blue too, which tells me that it's a prefab. And it also has gotten a new menu, this prefab menu up here on the right where the properties are. So this one doesn't have it, not a prefab. This one has it. And you can see that you can open the prefab. And this object is now like on your hard drive. It's a real thing. So it's basically something that you can refer to in multiple scenes or multiple times in a scene. So if I just say, I could open any of these because they're all the same prefab. So if I click open, now you can see I'm almost in like my own scene here, and I can make whatever change I want to. So let's say I want to make it really narrow and very tall. And then when I leave this, when I press this tiny little back arrow here, it's going to save that prefab. And now you can see that they're all the same because they're all the same prefab. So they're always sharing these properties. So that's really useful. Prefabs, we will be using them. They're really handy. And obviously, this is a super simple example, but as we add more stuff to them, like, you know, it's great to just be able to do it once and then drag it into the scene when you want. So yeah, that's cool. So the other thing about prefabs is you can see they have an overrides panel. So right now they're all identical, but if you wanted, say, one of these cubes to have all the things that all the other ones do, be the same color, be the same, you know, have the same scripts on them and stuff, but you want this one to be like fat, then you can do that. You can just make the change in the scene, and you'll see that it now has this override on it. And you can apply the override, which will give all of the prefabs that edit you just made. Or if you just want to leave it unique, you can just leave it alone and it'll have an override. So you can have a prefab that also has something unique about it. So that's really cool. So I totally recommend digging into prefabs. All right, so without further ado, let's start making games. So in this game, this is like the first thing that I like to do is, you know, I go on paper and I decide, like, what is it? You know, it's hard to go in without a battle plan. So in this one, I'm like, all right, it's gonna be a stealth game because I've just been feeling stealthy lately. I don't know about you guys, but you know, I feel like every interaction with anybody these days is you're like slinking by each other, or you're like, you know, you're like trying to like scoot past someone, and then you're in the grocery store and there's one person in the aisle. So you're like, well, that aisle's dead to me, and I need to go to a different aisle. So because of that, I thought like a stealth game would be great. So I wanted to take some of those classic stealth mechanics. So what does a stealth game need? You need to be able to sneak, right? So I think a good stealth game, you can kind of change your speed. So like how fast you're walking. So maybe like being able to sprint, or maybe being able to like use the analog stick to just sneak, and then if you push it more, you can like go faster. So that kind of stuff is great. And then the other thing it needs is, of course, it needs enemies. It needs someone who can catch you. So I think that's really important for a stealth game. And then what's the win and what's the lose? Well, I think like in a stealth game, usually you're trying to get something, right? Like a thief or something like that, a spy. You're trying to go and get like a treasure. So it's kind of like a treasure hunt, right? You get it, and then you get out and you win. In this case, we're going to go even simpler, and we're just going to say if you get it, you win. But of course, you could make it be that you have to get it and then escape to win. So there's always more you can add on. But basically, the idea is that if we get those things in, you know, you're going to be able to sneak. You're going to be able to control how fast you can go. You're going to have enemies that look for you and seek for you, and they can catch you. And then we have our win and lose state pretty easily, right? You win if you get the treasure, which in this case is going to be the last toilet paper roll. and you lose if you get caught. Super simple. So it's an easy goal, and defining it really early on is super important, because then when you start, like, you realize you're working on some guy's animation, and like, does he have root motion on him, and is this working? You can realize you're like, maybe that's not important for like yet. Like, maybe what I need to be focusing on is like, does the game do those things that I just said, right? So that's what we're going to focus on. So this is how I start prototyping. I start building out the things that I need. So we already have a little level here, and again, feel free to modify this or build your own level. You know, you can move these around, duplicate them, and you can build your own world, so it doesn't have to be the same as what I have here. What I'm showing you, it'll work. So feel free to like get creative here. Yeah, that'd be great. And if you guys want to share the stuff that you've made or any changes you made to the game later, please do that. That'd be great to see everyone's stuff. Okay, so we have our level already though, and that's just up in here in level. So now what do we need? Well, we have a camera. We're gonna need a camera. We're gonna have to modify that camera, because right now it's just like looking at this pole. But for now we can leave that alone. Let's just get our pieces in place. So we need a player. We need an enemy so that we can reuse. So that enemy is gonna be a prefab. And we need some behaviors, so some scripts and stuff for the player to be able to move and to get caught and stuff like that. And then we also need like enemy navigation. And then we're also going to need the aisles. And then we're going to need a toilet paper roll. So that's going to be a prefab. And then we're going to need some ideas, some logic for how does this toilet paper roll, where is it? So like if it's in the same place every time, that would be boring, right? So we're gonna make it spawn into random locations. So how do we do that? So we'll take a look at that. So spawning random locations, giving the enemy some AI so it can path and find you and seek you, all that stuff. We're gonna do that. So let's start with the player. I think that's a great place to start. So let's add a new object. Let's create an empty. And then again, let's just reset its position right off the bat. And you can see it's kind of over here, but that's fine. And this is going to be player. So the player is gonna be, is gonna have a lot going on. They might have some animations, they might have some other things, but I really recommend building your important things like prefabs and players and those kind of things as like a container first. So I see a lot of games where people, or Unity projects where people are building kind of directly at the top node, like the top node is a cube. And the problem with that is that it's not very flexible. So like later, what if you don't want your player to be a cube? What if you want it to be like a fully animated rigged character? Or what if you want it to be a sphere, instead of a cube? Well, the problem is now you have to like unwire everything and rip everything out. Whereas if I start with a container and I put all my logic and all my scripts on this container, but then I put the stuff that is about this character inside the container, it's really easy to swap stuff in and out, and it's really flexible. So let's do it that way. So I'm going to make a cube, and I'm going to put it in the player, and you can see that this cube and the player are far away, so you can just right click on the cube and reset it, and you can see it'll go to where the player is. So now let's just move the player object somewhere in the scene so we can see it, and we'll press F to focus on it. And you can see that the cube is halfway in the floor, so you could move the player up, but in fact we want the player's bottom to be on the ground, because that's really useful, right? So instead let's move the cube up, and you can see it's halfway in the ground, so and it's a 1 by 1 by 1 cube, so let's move it up in Y half, and now you can see it's perfectly on the bottom there, but our player object is on the ground, so that's really useful. So this is, if you can imagine the player walking around, you can see that we can just keep him on the ground and slide him around, and it's going to work perfectly. So this is not the most elegant player in the world, but I really recommend you do this. So it kind of looks like a debug mode, but this is prototyping. Like all major game studios, all major games, they start this way. Your character is just like its collider, or your character is just, it just shows you the space that character is going to occupy, and we're going to build all the logic out. But the important thing is you want to start simple and then build up, because if you start complicated, again, it's just like so easy to get lost in that forest of just, going off into the weeds, getting distracted by stuff, and you don't end up finishing your game. You just like make all these little neat things and toys, and it's cool, but you're like, oh no, I don't have a game. So we're going to focus on game first, and then we'll see how much time we have to add some extra flourishes. So the player's transform doesn't have to be zeroed out now because we moved it in, but I'm getting a question here. Does the player's transform have to be zeroed out? I recommend zeroing it out first just so that it's on the ground in Y and Z, but you can see that we did move it into the level just so that we could see what it looked like on the tiles. So once you're all hooked up here, I would say, you know, you're cool. You can move the player wherever you want. But in this game, we're probably not going to have the player be jumping, so you're going to want their Y to be zeroed out. So just the Y. And then the cube, though, you are going to want the cube to be 0, 0.5 so that it isn't in the ground, and then 0, because you don't want it to be far away from the player object, or else you're going to get like these weird things where when it rotates, it's not actually rotating the right way, that kind of stuff. And if you have it in the right place, then of course it's going to rotate how you expect. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so the one thing that would be useful for us though is that the player should have like a face so that we know what direction that you're looking in. I think that'll be useful. Yeah, you're welcome. So the Z axis, this blue one, is pointing forward. So let's put its face in the Z forward. So I'm just gonna Control D, duplicate that cube, move it out here, and then I'm gonna shrink it down, you know, just like a little guy, and then ponk, it's like a nose, maybe like a pig nose. So let's move that down a little bit, and maybe I'll make it a little bit more pig nosy. Okay, great. So now this is looking like someone we know, and yeah, there it is. And I think we can actually duplicate this again and even give it some little eyes. So let's shrink them down a little bit more, and let's just, I guess they should be more like up and downy to be eyes. There you go. Yeah. So let me see if I'm being faithful to the design here. It's close enough. Sorry. All right, so we'll press Control D again, move this over, and we have our little pig. All right, so that's sweet. Oh, I got the official seal of approval. Nice. All right, so now we have our player, and what we're gonna do here is, how you shrink. So you need to use the scale tool. So if you go up into the left, the top left, you can see if you hover over an icon, it'll tell you what the tool is. So that's like the move tool, that one's the rotate, and then that one's scale. So if you click on that one, you can click on the gray box in the middle to scale everything at the same time, or you can click on one of the colored axes to scale just in that axis. So yeah, you can scale that way. You can also use the keys on your keyboard, W, E, and R, to go through those 3 tools. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just using the hotkeys because it's fast. And then now that we have our little guy assembled, what I would recommend doing is just to keep this organized, let's name these things. So this is going to be, you know, the eye. So that's eye. Okay. And then that one's also an eye. So that's an eye. Okay, cool. And then that's a nose. So nose. Okay, great. And then, yeah, and if you're used to 3D modeling programs at all, like Blender and stuff, like this is just like home sweet home. You know, all this stuff is really, you know, you should be pretty familiar with it. So if you take a look at his face, you can see that they're all separate right now. So they're all in the player object, which is great, but they're all separate from each other. So just to group these things together, I'm gonna put everything under the cube. So let's take this face. By the way, if you're in the scene and you shift select, you can multiple select things, or if you control click, you can select multiple things, but you know, just they don't have to be like everything in between. So I'll shift select that nose and eyes and drag and drop that in the cube. Now they're parented, and now you can see if I move the cube around, it moves our whole guy. And now I think we can rename the cube to pig. Okay, great. So now we have a little character here, and that is good, but you know, we could be a little bit more cheerful with our colors here than just dull gray. So here's how materials work. Materials are actual things on your hard drive. They're files. So we need to make them in your assets folder. So if you go into materials, you can see I've made a couple of useful ones for you, but we don't have one for the player yet. So if you click the plus button in your projects, again, that's the different from your hierarchy. So hierarchy is for this live scene, project is for your actual hard drive. So if you click plus on the project one, you can see tons and tons and tons of things that you can make. And we're gonna just scroll around until we see material. It's kind of in the middle here. Click that, and we're gonna name it. Let's call it Pig Pink, which is a good one. And does anyone know what is the official PIGSquad pink color? Does anyone have like a Pantone swatch for me? I don't know. I'm going to eyeball it. So if you look at this material, all these material settings, you'll see there's a ton of options here, but we're going to keep things simple, and all we need to do is change the color. So we'll just click on this color picker, and you just find the pink that you think is the PIGSquadiest pink. I feel like it's a pretty hot pink, right? I'm going to go like pretty hot with it. All right, so that's a pretty PIGSquady pink. And then there's a couple ways to apply it. So my favorite is you can just drag it from your project directly into the scene, and you can just drag it onto the object that you want. That's really cool. The other thing that you can do is you can drag it from your project to the hierarchy and let go, and that'll work. And then the last way is if you click on the object that you want to change, you can actually see in Mesh Render Materials, there's that material right here. So you can always click on it and click this little circle icon. Wherever you see one of these little circle icons, this is a picker. So you can click that and it'll show you all the materials in your project, and you can type to find things like pig and you can find it and do it that way. But you know, that drag and drop is a lot easier, so. All right, so now we need a material for the eyes. So we have pig pink. You can duplicate materials and stuff that are files on your hard drive the exact same way that you can in the hierarchy with Control D. So I'm going to go do Control D, give ourselves another material, and this time I'm going to call it pig eyes. And this time I'm going to make them like beady little, you know, black eyes. So I'll pick something close to black. All right, and then let's drag pig eyes to the eyes, and that is looking like a thing. All right, so I'm liking that. I'm liking that. Okay, great. So now we got our guy, and I really, really recommend that you do start this way. Keep things simple. Don't worry about like going into Mechanim and figuring out all these complicated things about like rigs and all that stuff, because like animation and rigs and all that stuff is like its whole own box to open up, and it's cool, but there's tons of stuff to learn there and play with and test with, and like you don't need that to have a fun game. So I would recommend fun game first, all the gloss and polish stuff later. So we have a basic character here, which is cool, but he's the player, so he's gonna need, well, I don't know the gender of this pig actually. The pig is going to have some properties. The player is going to have some properties. So first of all, we need them to be able to move, right? We need them to be able to grab, because we need them to be able to grab the TP, and we need them to be able to get sensed. We need the ability for the enemies to be able to sense them. So we're going to need certain things for that. And then we're also going to want to do a couple of other things to let the system that we're building know that this is the player. So in Unity, the easiest way to do that is to click on the top object. So this is where all our logic is going to go. This is how I like to do it. I think this is a really nice and clean way to do it. Put all your logic on that top empty game object. Put all the scripts and all the things that like tell the player what its movement is and all that stuff. Put that there. And then in like this is just like your mesh. So don't do anything special with this. Just treat it like you know, something that you can swap in and out, so that if you wanted to have new artwork, you could just do that at any time and it wouldn't break your whole player, you know? So in the player, the easiest way to tell Unity that it is a player is by using tags. So there's two things in Unity that are great. We'll go over this a little bit later, but there's tags and there's layers. And any object can have a tag, and it can have a layer. And the reason that there's two different things is that tags are for finding stuff, usually. Like tags are to help your system identify that something is a thing, like it's a player or it's a bullet or it's an enemy. So they're really good in scripts and other things to be able to track down things and find them. So that's really what tags are for. Layers are a little bit different. You can group stuff together in layers, but layers you can use for like rendering, like everything in this layer renders on top of that layer. And you can also use it for collisions, and we are going to be using that for collisions in this game. Layers each have their own ability to collide or not collide with the other layers. So if you separate a layer out, you can say like, well, you don't collide with all this stuff, but you do collide with certain things. So that's a really useful thing, and that's how we're going to use layers in this case. But you can use them for rendering and some other tricks too. So we'll take a look at that. But basically, it's a player. So let's go to tag player. Unity starts with a few already. You can see that I've added a new one for us called TP, but if you ever want to make a custom tag, all you have to do is go to tag, add tag, and you can actually see this has our layers here too, which we have a few custom layers here, which we'll be looking at. And then we have the tags here, and there's only one, but if you wanted to add another one, you can just add it there. If you want to remove it, you can just click on it and click the minus, and it'll be gone, right? So that's how those work, and really useful, and we'll dig into that more. So now player is marked as player, so we'll know that it's the player. That's great. And now the next thing that player is going to need is a couple of things. They're going to need a collider so they don't fall through the floor. They're going to need a rigid body, which is how Unity handles physics, so that's going to give it physics and gravity and stuff like that. And then they're going to need some scripts and behaviors that tell them how to move, that tells the player like how to move and what to do and all that stuff. So we're gonna dig into that, like why not? All right. So the first thing that we're gonna need is the collider. That's usually the first place to go. Now you can see that this pig mesh has a collider on it, which is fine, we can leave that there, but I'm gonna put the collider on the player object. And again, the reason why is because I really recommend all of the logic and all the things that make the player should be on the top object. And then the stuff in the bottom is stuff that you can swap out easily in the future. If you like cross all those wires together, it can get really hard if you want to change the player later, because then you have to unhook everything and hook everything, and that can get sort of, it can get tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add Component. You can also always find components and drag and drop them here, but I'm going to do Add Component, and I'm going to type in Collider, because there's a ton of components out there, so typing is the best way. And we're going to add a capsule collider. And if you open up the collider, if you close it down, you won't see anything. If you open it up, you'll see it. So what's a capsule collider? A capsule collider is it starts as like this little circle, but if you make it tall, then you'll see it turns into like a little capsule. And capsules are great for player controllers because they can slide around and they don't get stuck on walls and stuff because they don't have corners. They can just roll around them. So we're going to use a capsule collider. So the capsule collider is going to have certain height and stuff to like kind of match with this guy. So the way to do this is you can type in values, and you can be like, okay, not that, maybe I'll do that, but that can take a long time. So what I recommend is if you come over to the actual letter, like where it says XYZ, if you hover over Y, you can drag it back and forth. I actually didn't know this for a while. It's really cool. This works on anything in Unity. If you go to the left of the input and you're on the label, you can just drag it left and right, and you can do it by eye, which is great. So I'm going to move it up a little bit, let's say like there, and then I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Let's put the radius to like that. And then I'm going to make the height more. I'm going to make it taller, maybe like not quite 2. Yeah, okay. And then, so what I need to do here is I need to align the bottom of this thing with the bottom of the player so that he doesn't go through the floor. So one easy way to do that is if you're in your scene view, and you look at this little gizmo, you can click on any of these axes and it will snap you to that axis. So you can see I have like a perfect view. And then if you see where it says right, I click that and it'll go from a perspective view to an orthographic view and back and forth. So if you want to perfectly line something up, going to like one of these views and then going to an orthographic view is the best way to do that. So now you can see I need to get this capsule lined up there. And so I can just take this Y and just scoot it up and get it just right. So that's how I would do that. And I think, this is pretty close. Maybe now I can just type it in, maybe around there. That looks good. Pretty good. All right, so now you can click back to perspective, and you might be wondering like, why that doesn't look like the pig? Why would I make this? Well, keep in mind, this is just the collider for the player. So I don't have to have it look like the pig, right? And I might want to replace this pig with different artwork at some point anyway. In this case, I don't. I love the pig. But the important thing is that your collider doesn't have to be the exact same shape as your character. This is just like it's physics in the world. So I want it to be, kind of like that. So he can like, there's a little slop, like maybe he can like go through a little bit of a wall or something, and like that's okay. Like as long as he's not, it's not breaking the game. I don't want you to get too you know, I don't want you to get stuck on stuff and stuff because your collider is too large. So I just have this little capsule collider here. So that's great. Now the next thing that we're going to need is we're going to need a rigid body, which gives you physics. So if you just type in rigid body, we're going to use a rigid body, open that up. And this automatically, it's using gravity, so this automatically makes the player react to gravity. So if I click play, so there's the play pause up at the top here. If I click play, you can actually still play with things in the scene mode. So I'm just going to pick up the player and drop him a couple times. And you can see, great, he's reacting to gravity. He's got physics. He's got a collider, so he doesn't pierce through the ground. That's really cool. But now you can kind of see that there's this issue where, like, what if I kind of like knock him over a little bit? Like, you know, what if I like rock him and now he like falls over? Well, we don't want that. In this game, the player is not supposed to be able to fall over. It's not like, you know, that kind of game. So what you can do is in the rigid body, you can actually use constraints and you can lock certain things. So in this case, we're going to lock all of his rotations so that he cannot rotate from physics. So what that means is that if I rotate him manually, I can do that because it'll still do what it said, but the physics engine won't deal with that rotation. So you can see now he's fine. He's not going to fall over ever. And now we don't have to worry about this character falling over. So that's really good. These constraints can be really useful. The other thing I'm going to do is there's no jumping in this game. So I'm going to just freeze position in Y. So he can't even move up. And now what it's going to look like is when I click play and I move him up, it looks like he's not reacting to gravity anymore. But that's not true. He's still reacting to gravity. It's just that we've locked his position in Y. So whatever we set his position at Y at, that's where it's going to stay. And that's great. So you can modify your rigid bodies to kind of do exactly what you want. Yeah, that's great. So now I want the player to be able to just basically push other things out of his way. So I'm going to make his mass like super a lot. I don't know, like something crazy. If you just make a huge mass here, it'll just mean that like if there's other objects with physics in the scene, like you'll just knock them out of the way instead of getting like stopped on them, you know? Okay, so that's cool. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to give a little bit of drag to him. So drag in the case of the player controller, it just means that I'll give it like 5 and 1 maybe on drag and then angular drag. All this means is that there's friction. So when you add drag, it adds friction to like the floor and stuff. So this will just make it so like if you're pushing against a wall, there's going to be friction against it and you'll kind of like grind against it, rather than if we had no friction, you'd be like whoosh across that wall. So I just do this to make it look a little bit more realistic when you're like running into things. So that's cool. The rest of these can be as they are. We'll just leave it alone. I'll actually, sorry, I might have to get a little water. So this collision detection, it's set to discrete right now. Because this is the player and we're always going to be looking at the player, I would actually recommend setting this collision detection to continuous so that it's not, discrete means it only tries to use it when it needs to, but in this case we need it all the time. So we can just say, thank you. We can just, yeah, I know, good reminder. Oh, look. Water. In this case, we're just going to put it on continuous, which means it's always going to be checking the physics for this object. So that's great. So really simple. The other thing that we can do is in the capsule collider, I actually have prepared a material called character for you, and this is a physics material. If you don't have a physics material, it's okay, it'll just be like default. But if you want it, you can add a physics material, and if you click on an object in Unity that's assigned, it'll take you right to that asset in your folder, so that's great. So here we are, boing boing. So if you click on that, you can see that I can actually add like some extra settings here. So there's some friction settings and stuff like that. So I just added that to add even a little bit more friction to this guy. Probably don't need it, but there you go. All right, so the next thing is we're going to be adding our behaviors. So these are scripts, but we're not going into code. This is not a code session. There's so much information on coding and scripting out in the world, and I definitely recommend that you dig into that stuff. It's great. They're really good skills to have. But for this session, I've made these scripts for you. So don't worry, we're not going to actually be looking at code today. If you're interested though, you can look up these scripts yourself, and you can see how I put things together. If you're interested in the logic and the code, you can see how I approach that. Now, if you add a component and type in the name of your script, you'll be able to find it. So if you actually add component on the player object and type in behavior, these are all little behaviors. So you can see we have a number of them here, and we're gonna start with the basic behavior. So the basic behavior is kind of like a catch-all. It's like the mother behavior. It controls all the other behaviors that you plug into it, and it controls some basic things about the scene. You can see it's asking for cameras and some other settings here. And then I'm gonna add some more behaviors here, excuse me. So the basic behavior is like the basic brain, but then this isn't gonna let us move yet. So to move, we need a move behavior. So there's our move behavior. And you can see these all have like some settings that we can tweak and set. And if you don't have the project files from today, most of these behaviors came from a free third-party asset, a free one called third person plus fly. If you look on the asset store, you'll find that. I'll just type it in, third person plus, and it'll probably come up, fly. So there it is. You can see this this guy, Vinicius Marcus, made it for us. Great guy. But so anyway, I just used the free version. And again, I could code this out myself, but why, if there's something that can get you up and running quickly, why not use it? It's, you know, it's cool. So that's the great thing about Unity, tons of free stuff. So I just imported that into the project, and you can see this already actually has some basic stuff in here, but I have modified it. So I've modified it for this game, and I've added some behaviors that it didn't have, like grabbing. So just know those assets are in this project file. They are a little bit modified from the one that you would find on the asset store. So just know that. But anyway, so back to our player. So we have the basic behavior, we have the move behavior. We're gonna need some other behaviors here, but for now, this is probably enough. I think that's probably enough to be able to move, and let's see if it is. Right? So are we playing? Are we moving? No, because we haven't dragged anything into here. So we have our camera. Let's just drag that into here for now. There's our cameras. There's our behaviors. Okay. And then I'm actually getting a little error here, and this is probably why it wasn't moving. So check this out. See this little red line down at the bottom? If you click on that, it'll bring up your console, and this thing looks scary, but it's actually the most useful feature of Unity because it tells you what's wrong, and you can probably spend more time here in the console than anywhere else in Unity trying to figure out what's going on with things. So you can actually see that it's saying that there's a missing component, and it's expecting an animator on the player game object. So the player needs an animator. Okay, that's easy. Let's do it. So let's click on player. Let's click on add component, type in animator. Animator. Now we have an animator on the player. Now you can see there's no controller for it. So if we just click the picker, you can see that we've got a character controller. Looks like there's a few different controllers here, but let's just pick the first one. And this character controller came with that asset, so you don't really have to do anything, but it needs it. So let's say we try that again. So we've given it an animator. And does it work now? It does. Look, we can move. All right, cool. So now we need a couple more things. Now, if you want to reorganize stuff, you can always drag and drop it. So I can drag this animator above the behaviors, for instance, if I wanted to. Let's go there. There you go. And then also in this animator, it did have an avatar. I mean, let's just go ahead and add it. It's the character shadow avatar that also came with that asset, so that we're just using the basic hookup that asset had. So let's just go ahead and use this. We'll say character controller in the animator for player. We'll use that character shadow avatar, which is just the character that came with that asset, the third person fly asset. We will apply root motion because the root motion from this animation will help it to walk forwards. Okay, and then we will click play now, and I think we will be able to move with our W, S, A, and D keys. So WADSTA on a keyboard. So yeah, I'm moving around. Check me out, cruising. Now you can actually see there's a character rig being animated here, right? So we don't even need the animation or anything, but we're using the root motion from that rig to drive our steps, which is pretty cool. So if you don't want to see that, because like it's kind of annoying to see it, right? The way that Unity works is it's the same with the colliders. If you collapse the collider in the object, it disappears and you don't have to see it anymore. If you collapse the animator, it will hide that animation data and you don't have to see it anymore. So now you can see we can just we can drive around. Super Pig. All right, cool. So our player's starting to come together. Let me just go back to player really quick here, and let's add a couple more behaviors because we're going to need a couple more things. So I think you saw this in the game, but we're going to be able to have an aim camera in this game so that we can zoom in from kind of the player's eyes and get like a sneak look, so we can strafe and sneak around and see what we're looking at, hide from enemies and stuff. So we're going to add another behavior, and this one's going to be the aim behavior, right? And then the last behavior we're going to need is the actions behavior. I called this is a custom behavior that I added, and you can see that it's grab. It's just the grab. But if you wanted to add more actions, you could. So this actions behavior is going to be how we grab. Okay, so now we're going to look at how to make a grab button. Like, how do you make a button? So in Unity, that's input, right? So what you would do is you would go to Edit, Project Settings. It's in your project settings, and you can see there's a number of settings in here. But if you go to Input Manager, you can see that there's a bunch of different things in here, and these are all your buttons. Like, these are all the things that you can do, right? So there's movement, there's flying, there's jumping. We're not going to use some of these because we're not going to be flying or jumping in this game. There's fires, and then there's different things, and you can see that it could be driven by the mouse, or it could be driven by like a joystick. So if you plugged in like a PS3 controller or something like that, this game would still work, and you could use your analog stick to walk slowly, and then fast. But since I'm just doing it on the keyboard right now, you can use your WASD keys to move around, and then you can use your mouse to click to grab stuff. So if you want to add a new input, all you have to do is type a higher number, and then you'll get a new input, and you can type in new thing, and that'll be your new button. Oh, this menu, yeah, I'm getting a question. How'd you open this menu? So this menu you can access from your project settings. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, it'll bring you into all these windows, and then if you click on Input Manager, then you're going to see all this stuff. So that's the Input Manager. So now you can see it's got this new thing, and I can tell it should it be a mouse click or a keyboard button, and blah blah blah, and you can define what the button is. So this will be your input. So I'm gonna under the Edit menu and the main menu, so if you go Edit, project Settings, and then Input Manager, there may be a way to access it directly, but usually I just go Edit, Project Settings, Input Manager. But yeah, cool. So anyway, if you go to if you want to remove a key, you just type a lower number, but keep in mind, if you type a super low number, it'll like erase a bunch of these. So I wouldn't go under 23. But anyway, so if you look at the name of this button, the name is grab, and it has a capital G. So I'm going to take that name, and it's already set up to be mouse 0, which is your left click. And then I'm going to exit, and I'm going to make sure that the grab button that's in this script is the same. And you can see it actually isn't. It needs a capital G, doesn't it? So this button is going to be referencing that button name in the input manager. So whatever the name of the button that you want to use in the input manager is, that's going to be what your grab is. So if you wanted the grab to be like a right click instead, then you could just go and switch those settings. Okay? And now you can see that some of these things are expecting me to give them stuff. So there's a grab collider object, and there's nothing here yet. So, oh yeah, we need to have like a way to sense what I'm grabbing, right? Oh, sorry, someone's saying that I'm covering up a little bit of the inspector with the pip. So let me, that is a good point. Let me see what I can do about that. That's great. Good call. Let me see. I can move myself over here. All right. Does that help? So now, can you see this? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. All right, so as we got down here, yeah, that is true. We could collapse rigid body and stuff like that, but I think it's still going to be pretty low. So anyway, so here we go. I'm going to just move over here on the left, so I'll be over here. And so for this actions behavior, you can see that we replaced the grab button name with a uppercase G, grab, because that was the name in the inspector, so in the input manager inspector, so great. And then you can see that it's expecting this grab collider object. So this is what we're going to do to sense that I'm grabbing something and to define like what my grab looks like, right? So this is when colliders in Unity can be really useful. There's a couple, obviously there's different ways that you could approach this. You can raycast, you can do some other things, but we're gonna do this in a way that I really like, that is kind of a physics-based way, and it's really simple, which is using trigger colliders. So the first thing that we need to do is inside of our player, we need to make a an object. So it's gonna be let's make it a cube. That's gonna be the area that I can grab inside. So I'm going to say, here's a cube, and you can see the cube now. And the reason I'm making actual geometry here is because it's really easy to see and it's easy to debug. And then once we have it how we like it, we can just hide it later. You know, you can just hide the mesh renderer and then it'll keep the collider. So this is really good. So in this case, instead of adjusting the size of the collider, I'm going to adjust the size of the actual object. And then you can see that the collider is always going to be that size. So that's great. So we're just gonna make this the size of a grab. So if that sounds weird, in this game there's a bunch of shelves, right? And they might go up to like this high, and the toilet paper could be on any of these shelves. Might be on a low one, middle one, high one, but we don't have the ability to like reach up and down. It's not that kind of complex game. We just push grab, right? So I actually want the grab collider to be like really tall, like way taller than the player, so that I can grab, because it's a top view camera, right? So for the player, it's just going to look like, yeah, I got it. But from the debug view, it's going to look like this really tall wall just appeared in front of you really quick. And that's going to be the area which you can grab in. So you can grab from any of the shelves all at once, and it's going to be more about just finding where it is in front of you than it is about like, you know, aiming up and down. So for that, we got to make this thing really tall. So I think I'll make it like pretty tall, like maybe 1.5, maybe like 3. Yeah, like 3 tall, like so about as tall as it is. And then what I'm going to do is the player's face is there, so you're going to grab in front of you. But I'm going to overlap a little bit of your face so that like if it's really close to you, you still grab it, right? We don't want to not be able to, like if it's like this and the object's here and then you can't grab it, that would be so frustrating. So we're going to make it right there, and we're going to make it, yeah, so that you can grab it. And then I think what we'll do is we'll scale it down a little bit in Z, so like you can't grab too far away from you, you know? So maybe something like, maybe what we'll do is we'll just scoot it in a little bit more so that you can grab, yeah, so that seems pretty fair. So you can grab about that far, about that deep into a shelf, right? So that's cool. All right, and then, so that's maybe even more so that you can get really close to yourself, and yeah, it's great. So here's our grab collider, and we're gonna do a couple things to it. So one, I want it to be really easy to see while we're debugging the scene, while we're prototyping. It's really important to have debug. So I made some materials here. If you go here on the mesh render and you click on the picker for the materials and you type in debug, I've actually made a bunch of different debugs. Look, I got debug aqua, debug green, and so on. Let's give this like a debug green. Aqua's kind of nice. Let's give it a green. And you can see what this does is it just makes it like semi-translucent. So it makes it really easy to see where the player is grabbing without kind of getting in the way of the scene. So this is great. And again, I really like this approach. I just make it with objects like a cube, a sphere, or whatever, so that it's really easy to see. And I put a debug material on this. And by the way, there's nothing special about this debug material. If you look at the material, all it is I've used a sprites diffuse. Don't ask me why. This one just seems to work the best, because what sprites diffuse has is it has nothing except for a color, but the color also allows you to set the alpha, the transparency. So it's like perfect. So I just use the sprites diffuse as my debugs, and all I'm doing is changing the color. So it's nothing special. So now that I have this cube, first of all, let's name it. It's not a cube. It's a grab collider, right? This is a sensor that we're going to use to sense what you can grab. Now, here's the other thing. We need to make sure that it's a trigger in the box collider. We'll set that to trigger because we don't actually want it to smash stuff. We don't want it to run into things and push them away. We just want it to sense that they're there. So that's what trigger does. Trigger basically senses that something is in its zone, but it doesn't mess with it. It doesn't push it away or anything. So this is great. So I'm gonna, I mean, that's all we need to do here. This is like our sensor, all right? And then the last thing that we're gonna do is we're going to use layers to our advantage here. So if you look up into this tag layer thing up here, I'm gonna click on layer, and you can see I've already set up a layer called player hand. So this is acting like your hand. We're pretending it's your hand, even though we don't have an arm, but it's like your hand. So I'm just going to put on the player hand layer. Now, if you didn't have this layer, you can always click on add layer and you can add a custom layer. You can they're just whatever you want to call them. But I already created a few for you here. So player hand is a layer, not a tag. So you might be wondering, like, why aren't we tagging this? Why are we putting it in a layer? And here's the reason why. So if you go to edit, project settings again, that's also where we had the input manager. There is a physics tab, and this physics tab has some really interesting stuff. You can actually fine-tune gravity and the physics and all this stuff in here, right? But if you scroll down to the bottom, hopefully you guys can see this, there's this weird thing called the layer collision matrix, and if you don't see it, that just means you gotta click the arrow and open it up. So if you see this guy, what this does is it shows you every layer in your project and then all those layers again. And what you can do is you can say what layer can interact with what other layer. So this is actually really useful so that you can say certain layers can interact with these layers, but they can't interact at all with these other layers. So that means collisions won't happen, triggers won't happen, and so on. It's really useful. And in this case, what we're going to do is you can see that player hand can't interact with anything except for interactables and collectibles. And so the reason we're doing that is so that you don't end up having to calculate interactions with the world all the time whenever you grab. The only thing that's this hand layer, this grabbing, is going to care about is collectibles. And in our game, there's only one collectible. It's the TP, right? So because of that, what we're making sure of is that your grab sensor and the TP, they can interact with each other, but they can't interact with anything else. They're dead to the world. And that's really useful because you don't want, like, the TP's there and then like some other collider comes in, like a bullet or something, and it hits it and it flies away, and now you can't beat the game because like the TP flew off the screen. So you can control the collision of these layers with layers. So that's why we're making your hand a layer. So yeah, hopefully that's clear. And if that's not, feel free to ask questions. So now we have our basic player setup, right? It's a player that has the artwork for the player, and it has a collider for its sensors, and then it also has all the logic up here. And now we can do what this actions behavior is asking us to do, which is, where is our grab collider object? Oh, our grab collider object is here. Okay, so now we can grab things, which is great. So remember, the grab button is assigned to the left mouse click. And let's test this out. Let's see if this works. So let's click play and see if we're missing anything. Oh, look at that. So this is already set up in the script, but you can see that every time I left click, it is looking in front of me and it's grabbing. Now that might look weird as a grab, but remember, what we're grabbing is everything that could be in front of us, even if it's on the highest shelf. So that's why we have this weird shape for the grab. But remember, the game is going to be played like this, so that you're just getting whatever's in front of you. So that's a really good way to do it. And all this does in the script is it turns this object on for a little bit and then it turns it off, so that you can't grab forever. You just get a little window with which you can grab. So that's cool. The other thing that it does is it stops your motion. So like whenever you're grabbing, you can't move while you're grabbing. So that just makes it a little bit like you can't like slide around and like slide in and grab the grab the TP and go. Like you have to actually like aim for it and get it right. And then there's like a little danger, because if you're grabbing there and you can't move during the time you're grabbing, then that means someone could catch you. So little stuff like that. Okay, cool. So now what we're gonna do is we have the player pretty well set up here, right? So that's great. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to set up the next pieces, and then we're going to start to quickly start integrating this. So I know I'm going pretty slow because I want to be sure that everyone can follow along in the kind of the nuts and bolts of this. But now we're going to pick up the pace a little bit, and we're going to start building out all these things, because I think you know, you got it by now, right? You're getting it. Okay, so the other thing is you can adjust these settings to your liking. I'm going to give you some basic settings. No, don't worry, Peter. I'm not gonna go too fast. We're still gonna go through everything step by step. So don't worry. I'm not gonna leave you in the lurch. Oh, good. Okay, good. If this speed is fine for you guys, then we can continue at this pace. That's fine too. Now I'm gonna give you a couple of settings that I just have found work really well, but feel free to fine tune them to your own favorite settings after you've played with it a little bit. But if we go into the player and we go into these scripts, I'm just going to give you a few numbers that I think work pretty well for this game. So for turn smoothing, I'm putting that all the way up to 1. That means that the lower this number is, the longer it takes you to turn. So like if it's really low, you turn like a battleship. And if it's high, you turn like instantly. And in this game, we actually do have a little bit of a turn, but not very much, because I want you to be able to like run away quickly, right? I don't want it to be like one of those games where you're like, and then you can turn around. So it's more or less instant. So I'm putting this all the way up to 1. And then for the movement, I think that some speeds that work pretty well is a walk speed of 0.2, a run speed of 0.7, and then a sprint speed of 3. So I like those settings. Now in this game, the input is already set up so that if you hook in like a PlayStation controller or something, like it'll be analog stick driven. So if you push it a little bit, you'll creep, and the more you push it, the faster you'll go. But we also have a sprint button. So right now the sprint button is the main button on your controller, but the on a keyboard it's shift. So if I just push left and right, I go this speed. But if I hold shift, you can see I sprint. So that sprint speed is the sprint speed. But then this walk and run speed, that's the slowest you can go versus the fastest you can go when you're pushing the analog stick. But it's also on the computer, I didn't want to leave you in the lurch because you just have WASD, right? So I'm using the mouse wheel. So this is a classic if you ever played the like Splinter Cell games back in the day. The way they did it was you could control how slow you're sneaking by going up and down on the scroll wheel. So if you push your WASD keys and you scroll up and down on your mouse's scroll wheel, you'll actually see you can control your sneaking speed, which is pretty fun. So that speed, this is going to be the walk to run speed. So that's the minimum speed, the maximum speed without pushing anything. And then when you push the sprint key, you'll get this speed, right? Okay. So I really like this idea too. And like I said, someone said that's a neat idea for using it on a keyboard setup, and I agree. And I don't take credit for it. Like that idea is straight out of my memories of playing Splinter Cell back in the day. So if your pig is working a little bit weirdly right now, keep in mind that we haven't set up the camera yet. And the camera is going to be a big part of this, because right now he's moving relative to a camera that is facing the wrong way. So we're going to put the camera behind him, and then his movement's going to make sense. So if your movement's a little wonky right now, that's totally okay. That's fine. We're going to correct that when we do the camera setup. I just saw a little question about that. But if you're getting motion at all, that means like it's working. You're working this out. And you can see we haven't even looked at the game scene yet, because the game scene is just this camera looking at a wall. Like I'm just focusing on here because again, this is what I like to do. Just prototype it. Just make sure it's working, how you expect, and then just keep getting those pieces more and more. So now you can see we have all this kind of stuff down to sprint speed. So let's finish the rest of these out. So the jump is a thing that comes with that 3D third-person fly kit. And you can have a jump, but I've disabled it for this game because this game doesn't need jumps. So if you're working on your own game and a different kind of game, you can use that third-person controller for really cool stuff. Like it has flying built in, and it has like jumping built in, and all these other cool things. So it's a great little free kit. Definitely recommend it. But we can ignore all these settings because we don't have a jump. So the aim behavior This aim behavior is what's going to control that switch to the camera view. So we're going to have like an over-the-shoulder cam where you can look you know, at the enemies that are coming at you and kind of hide. And it's also going to let you strafe while you're in that mode. And that over-the-shoulder cam is all controlled by this. So you can see that there's an aim button and there's a shoulder button. And if you go to project settings, input manager, you'll actually see that aim button right in here. So this is the same thing. It's referencing that button from your input manager to control what it's doing, right? And the aim button in this case was assigned to mouse button 1, which is your right click. So your left click is going to be grabbing, and your right click is going to be like that over the while it's going to be like while you hold that button down, it'll do like an over the shoulder cam. So we haven't set that camera up yet though, so you don't have to worry about this stuff yet. But for the settings, I would just recommend maybe put this to aim turn smoothing to 0.25. I think that's pretty good turn. And then for this other stuff, just leave it alone. Now, again, this is once we hook the camera up, you can tweak all these settings and get them just how you like. But for now, we can just leave it to these basic settings. Okay, great. So the camera is the next thing to set up. We've been talking about it, right? So let's set it up. Now, there's a couple of things that you can do with a camera. Unity has its own camera system. You can just click plus up here and you can click camera. You can see we already have a main camera in our scene. But I really recommend, I'm gonna drink some water. Drinking water periodically, I recommend that because it's very good for you. You can see I have my Musubi Maro character from Sendai, the Sendai Rice Ball Samurai. Not bad. Okay, so if you go to Window Package Manager, okay, these are a little bit different than Asset Store assets. These are packages that Unity has made that are built into Unity, but they're optional. So you can load them if you need them. And there's an insane amount of good stuff in here. And I would recommend only using what you need because it's really easy to overdo it and load in a billion packages and then your folder is like 14 gigabytes full of stuff that you probably won't use. But if you look in here, you can see there's just a ton of crazy things. There's all kinds of things in here. It's really cool. We're going to use Cinemachine, and that's the only package that you need. You can just type in Cinemachine up here and it'll pop up, and it is absolutely very cool. It is a virtual camera system and it's native to Unity now, and it's already imported in your scene. But if you don't see this menu up here, if you don't see a Cinemachine menu at the top here, then if you don't see it for any reason, just know that you can go to Package Manager, type in Cinemachine, and you can click download. It'll say download, and then once it's downloaded, it'll say import. And then since it's already imported in my project, it'll say import again. So you guys should already have this in your project, so you shouldn't need to do anything. But if for any reason you don't see it, just go to Package Manager and load up Cinemachine. Cinemachine is awesome. So here's what Cinemachine does. Cinemachine allows you to create virtual cameras that take over the main camera. So one of the traditional problems with Unity cameras is you make different cameras, right? And then you have all these cameras you have to manage, and it gets really tricky really quickly, and you have to script it to like which one's showing at which time. Cinemachine makes it really easy by giving you a virtual camera where you set up all the settings, but there's only ever one camera in your scene, so you never have to worry about camera conflicts. There's only ever one camera. It just like it gives it a brain, and it takes over the camera when you need to. And it has like virtual reality, yeah, a little bit, but it's even better actually, because you can use the cameras for all kinds of cool setups. You can use them for cutscenes, you can use them for rail shooters, you can constrain them to planes, you can do panning and tracking and dollying. There's a lot of really cool things you can do. You can use them for sequencing shots together between multiple cameras, and in our case, we're going to use it to crossfade between two different cameras. The main camera that follows the player, and then this over-the-shoulder cam. So we're going to be able to crossfade in between those two, transition between those two in the way that we want to, whenever we want to. Really cool. So the first thing to do is we're going to start with a few settings on our main camera, and then we'll get into Cinemachine and we'll build out the virtual camera. Okay? So The first thing is that our camera says main camera, but it's not tagged as the main camera. So main camera is a really useful tag that just tells Unity that this is the camera that you should be focusing on. And like I said, in a traditional Unity setup, you have multiple cameras and you have to keep flicking back and forth between who's the main camera. We're only ever going to have one main camera because of the virtual setup. So because of that, we can just tag this guy main camera and forget about it. It's easy. We don't have to do anything now. Okay, so now that we have this main camera, we're going to add a few things to it, all right? So we're going to add some components. We're going to add a third person orbit cam basic. So what is this? This is a script, again, that came with the third person plus fly kit. Great little kit. And this is already built to know about the player, and this is going to help with the problem that you brought up a little bit earlier, Peter, which was my movements still feel a little bit wonky. This actually connects the player to the camera so that your movements are synced up relative to the camera, which is, that sounds complicated, but it basically means like the camera is looking down at you, right? So up should be up from the camera's view. Like if the camera's looking over here and you push up, you might be going like to the right, right? So that's what this script does. Great and easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag the player object into where it says player. So this is how it knows that that's the player. And then we're going to type in a few different things here these are, again, just settings that I think were working well. So 0 in the pivot offset, 0, and then 1, and then negative 1.5. Okay. And then for the camera offset, we're going to go 0, and then we're going to go 1.5, and then we're going to go 1. No, sorry, way different. Negative 50, something like that. Okay, and then for the smoothing, we're going to put that really high, something like 80. This is like the smoothness of the motion. And then for the horizontal aiming speed, we're actually going to remove that, so 0. And then the vertical aiming speed, we're going to put it lower, like 2. Again, these are all settings you can adjust on your own later, but I recommend just starting with these baseline. And then the max vertical angle and the min vertical angle, I've tested this out and I'm setting it to negative 80 for both of them. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't actually want a max and a min. You can use this third person orbit camera script to set up a neat little camera where you can, like in a third person run behind game where you can control the camera a little bit. But in our game, we don't want to control the angle of the camera. We just want the camera to follow your player. So we're really only using this script to get the correct movement orientation from the camera's view. So I'm locking it to negative 80 degrees. So it's always going to be pointing almost straight down 90, but straight down 90 is a little boring. So we have a little bit off of that, 80. That's where I got that number. So since the max and the min are both to that, it just means like it can't vary. It's just going to stay at 80. So that's why I'm doing that. All right, so now we have that in there. That's great. And then what we're going to do is jump right into Cinemachine. So Cinemachine is really cool. It's got a bunch of different cameras. You can see they all have like special names, like what's a clear shot camera, what's a blend list camera. Don't worry about that. You can explore them on your own. There's documentation too that tells you about these things. They even have 2D cameras for 2D games. There's a lot of really cool ones. The one we're going to use today is a state-driven camera. We're going to create a state-driven camera. All of these can be great for different things, and I'll let you explore those on your own. I'm just going to explain the state-driven camera. So the state-driven camera is really cool. It is a camera system, so you can have more than one camera, that you can pick which camera you're using based on your game state. That's perfect. That's exactly what you want. So based on the state of our game, and in our case, it's going to be like, are you in aim mode? Then it's going to switch to the aim camera. So we don't have too complicated of a setup. We just have 2 cameras in our setup. But, obviously, if your game had like 5 cameras and all these different systems, and it was all driven by the state of your game, that's super useful. Yeah, exactly. Someone was actually talking about the camera getting stuck on things, and that's actually a really cool thing that Cinemachine does handle. So if you use the Cinemachine clear shot camera, that will actually, it gives the camera its own collider and physics, and it gives it basically its own AI to avoid walls and colliders. So the clear shot camera will always adjust itself to try to give you a clear shot. So it's a really cool camera. In our game though, because it's top down and there's no walls for the camera to get stuck on, we don't need it. But yeah, for certainly if it was like, you know, like a normal like third person over the shoulder game, you could get stuck in the wall pretty easily if it's like a Zelda or something. So because of that, that clear shot is super, super cool. But we don't need it for our game, so we're going to do the state-driven one. So you can see what it created. It created this Cinemachine, CM, state-driven camera, and then it automatically created one virtual camera. That's what VCam means. So one virtual camera below it. So this is kind of the parent where you group together all your different cameras. So this is going to be like the camera rig, you know, like the system, and then these are all the individual cameras themselves with all their individual settings. So this looks a little scary. There's a ton of settings, but we're going to go through it, and we don't need all of these settings because our camera setup is actually fairly simple. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this up near the top where the main camera is because I want to just keep my project a little bit organized. And this main camera got a new icon on it, and that icon is the Cinemachine icon, and you can see that it automatically, the Cinemachine automatically added a Cinemachine brain to our main camera. And the reason that it did that is because we tagged it main camera, because we're smart. So we tagged it main camera. Cinemachine knew it was the main camera when it came in, and it gave it a Cinemachine brain. And what's really cool is this is how it takes over the main camera. So it's going to actually, you know, take it over with your virtual cameras. So really cool. All right, so now you can see that we got to set up our virtual cameras. So on our state-driven camera on the top level, we're going to add a few things to it. So first of all, there's a follow and there's a look at. Follow means that it's physically moving in space and following something around. And what do we want it to follow? We want it to follow the player. So let's drag that in there. And then look at means that it's going to rotate to look at the object. And so you can have it follow one thing, excuse me, but look at another thing, for instance. But in this case, we want it to follow the player and we want it to look at the player. So it's doing both. And you can see as soon as we did that, immediately we've got a view here in our game view, and we're looking at the player. Now we're like at the floor level, so this isn't quite right yet, but you can see that it is looking at our characters. So that's so far so good. Now, it says here, animated target. So this is interesting. And again, if you hover over the labels, it tells you what they mean. So animated target, when I hover that, it says the state machine whose state changes will drive this camera's choice of active child, which in this case means the active camera. So again, this is going to be the player. Remember earlier where we put an animator on the player? So in this case, we're using the animator here, not in the way that you might think of. We're not actually using it for animation. The Unity animator is actually extremely useful, and I guess it's cool to pop over and look at it. So if you go to Window, Animation, Animator, this window will pop up, and then here it is. And if you click on an object that has an animator on it, so in this case, we have this character controller animator, it'll show you what that animator is. And you can see there's like a bunch of stuff going on in here. There's even some different layers going on in here. So you can see we have a base layer that's dealing with motion. There's a flying layer, which we're not using. There's a strafing layer, which we are using. You can strafe like back and forth when you're in aim mode. And then there's an arms layer that I've created to deal with grabbing. So these layers should be preset up for you, but just know that like you can do logic inside of an animator, and you can use it almost like you're using a script. So you can use it to actually control logic in your game. It doesn't just have to be for like, you know, animation, like I'm playing an animation. So that's a really cool thing to know. And those are the layers. And there's also parameters. If you look at the parameters, you can see that we can define, you can click plus and you can define different parameters. And this is very much like script, right? So you have speed, you have bool, you have a float number here, which is just a number with a decimal, that's a float. You have a bool, which just means it could be true or false. And you can see there's different things. So we've set up one for grabbing, like when you're grabbing, I wonder if this checkbox will come on. So let's play and click and see. So when I click, oh look, grab went on, and then it stays on for a little bit and it disappears. So that grab guy is of course how we're turning off and on our grab. So you can use stuff in the animator to build out game logic. Just wanted to make that really clear. It doesn't just have to be for animation. The Unity Animator is really powerful. So in this case, we're also going to control our camera and our camera setup with the animator. So that animator is on the player. That's where we put it. So we're going to also drag the player into the animated target. So we basically have player, player, player. Okay, pretty simple. So that's great. Now, for the layer that we're going to animate from, we're actually going to do this from the strafing layer because that's what handles the aiming and the strafing. So under animated target, get your player in there, and then you can find the different layers, and those layers, again, are the same layers that you're seeing here, right? So it's going to be this layer, and you can actually see it's either you're not aiming or you're aiming and then you're strafing because you get to strafe while you're aiming. So we're going to go back to that camera, and we're going to make sure that it's set to strafing, and then we're going to add our states here. So there's two different states. There's going to be one state and two states. So click plus and click new state. If you want to erase a state, you can always click on it and click minus. But we're going to need two states because we're going to have two cameras, and you're either going to be in normal mode with the camera above you, or you're going to be in aiming mode with the camera behind you, right? Great. So right now, though, we only have one virtual camera child, so that's no good. We need two of them. So let's duplicate this by pressing Control D. And let's name our cameras so that we know what's going on here. So let's call this one camera vcam main because that's just our main camera. And then this will be camera vcam, let's call it looking. I don't know, because it'll be like a over the shoulder cam. That's a bad name. You can call it something better. You can come up with a better name. So now we're gonna set the, go back to the main one, and we're gonna set this up. So you can see, here's my virtual camera children. So it has both of these, the main and the looking. And what we're going to do is we're going to say our default state, so just when we're default, that's going to be set to the main camera. That's good. And then when we're strafing, you can see there's like quite a few options in here. We're just going to pick the main one, strafing. So while we're strafing, then we're going to be doing looking. So this is so cool because like what would usually be a pretty complicated camera setup with a bunch of scripting and coding involved is literally just Cinemachine and me like picking the right animator states and cameras. Super cool. So the rest of this we're going to just leave as it is, except we're going to add one extension. So there's an extension to Cinemachine where you can do all kinds of cool stuff. Actually, someone was asking about this earlier, like what if your camera is going to get stuck on a wall or something? Again, in our game it doesn't matter because we're above, there's no walls to get stuck on, but this is where that would come in. See, there's a Cinemachine collider so that the camera can actually collide with walls and avoid them and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of cool stuff here. We're not going to worry about any of those though. The only one we're going to put is this one, Cinemachine camera offset. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to do all the calculations for the camera, and it'll know where it should be, and then from there have a little bit of an offset. So we're going to do that so that we can stay above this player. So in Y, we're just going to go up in the air, like about 5, and you can actually see exactly what happened when I did that offset, see? So right now we're in the ground, so that's why I want an offset. We're in the ground, so let's go up like 5. So now we're up nice in the air here. Much better. Okay, and we're going to apply that after aiming at the player. So this is good, just exactly how it is. So that's great. Now, I think we're going to need to adjust the position a little bit of where this camera belongs. So, but it's going to probably set itself automatically based on our rules. So you don't have to really worry about this stuff yet. So now for our main camera, when I click on the virtual camera, you can see it actually gives me a like a viewfinder, and it shows me like safe guides and stuff, and it's really cool. It shows me like you know, what the focal points are going to be and all this stuff. So Cinemachine again can do a lot. We're not going to use its full capabilities at all. We're going to just use it for a simple setup, but it's still going to really help us because of the camera switching thing. So there's a bunch of really cool things you could do, and if you go in here to the body and the aim, body is like follow, like where does the camera actually move, and then aim is of course how it rotates and what does it look at. So you can see right now it's on a transposer. You can actually see there's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can do, like track dollies and all this cool stuff. We're going to keep it simple though. So for the main camera, we are going to use a transposer, which just means that it moves its position around to follow the thing. And we are going to change the binding mode to be world space. So this lock to target with world up, that's like a Zelda kind of a camera, you know, where you can like rotate around the guy and stuff. We don't need to do that again. We're just going to be looking down, and we're never going to be rotating our camera at all. We're just going to be looking down, right? So we're just going to say you're just going to move around in the world. So world space, that's it. And then the follow offset is going to be 0, 7, because we need to be up high in the air. So see that? We went up high. And then I'm going to do a -8 in Z. And now you can see it's starting to look a lot better. Now we've got an actual camera behind our guy, right? Starting to look better. Now the damping I'm actually going to change. So the damping is how fast or how slow it'll like follow around with you. So if you move really fast, it'll kind of catch up, which is cool. So I like this damping to be 0.75 in X, and in Y I leave it at a full 1, and then in Z I'm going to do another 0.75. So the Y is this one, right? The up and down. So that one is, we're just going to leave alone. But for these ones where it can come around you, we're going to make those a little bit slower so it sort of eases into position. It'll feel good. Trust me, it'll feel great. All right, so now for the aim, this is where it gets simple. So this looks really scary, but actually we're going to just turn this off. So we're going to click on Composer, do nothing. And the reason why is, again, we don't want the camera to change. We just want it to point down at you and follow you around. We don't want to be able to move it around or anything. Noise is really cool. You can actually add like camera shake, and this is, you can script it so that like the noise turns on really strong when there's an explosion or something, like boom, but our game doesn't need those things. So we're going to leave that alone. Okay, but we are going to do this really a cool little extension here called follow zoom. So let's go add extension. Let's go follow zoom, and what this will do, you can see it's too close now, but what this will do is if you run really fast, the camera will do like a subtle little zoom in on you to like keep in on you. So that's really cool. This is optional. You don't even need this. But here's the settings I would use. I would use width of 10, a damping of 1, a minimum FOV, which is the minimum that it can zoom in to, of 9, and then a maximum of like 90, so a lot more. So now you can see this view is starting to feel a lot better. Okay, and if we play our game now, by the way, we already have this camera following your guy around. So if you can see, as you walk around and move around, it's actually following you now. And that question earlier about your movement feeling wonky should be feeling a lot better now. Like up should be up now, and down should be down. But it still hasn't quite framed your guy, so we still need a couple more tweaks to our settings here. But let's get our second camera set up, and then we'll go and get these little tweaks in. So the rotation is one of the reasons why it's messed up. So right now the rotation was just set to kind of some random thing. So we're actually going to rotate it down, but not exactly 90 degrees, because 90 degrees is so boring. Like everything looks kind of boring. We want a little angle on it. So again, I think 80 degrees is a good one. So I'm just going to put 80 in here. And that should feel a little bit better here. So now we're zoomed in pretty close. That's starting to look pretty good. Okay. So, oh, Peter, you're still having an issue with the movement? So I would, we'll take a look at it and we'll see if we can kind of like debug for you. But I would make sure, I would go back through into your player and make sure that look cam and player cam in the basic behavior, that you've dragged the main camera in there. And then I would also make sure that on the camera, state-driven camera, you've dragged the player into all of these follow, look at, and animated target. The other thing is, if you're getting stuck on the ground, you might want to go back to your player. Yeah, if you're getting stuck on a wall or something, you may want to go back to the player. Okay, yeah, great. If you're getting stuck on the on some invisible objects, what you may want to do is go back to the player and go and look at the capsule collider and just make sure that it's high enough that it hasn't pierced the ground. So I would do that. But if you're running around the level and like hitting walls, that might be intentional, because we're gonna add some rows of shelves and stuff in here that we are going to need colliders for, and so there are some colliders in this scene that you just can't see right now. So don't worry about that. It's going to make sense once we add all the props in. but if you're moving in the direction that you expect, then you're good. So if up is up and down is down and left and so on. So back to the camera, we'll go knock this out. So the V camera looking, this is going to be the one that's looking over the shoulder. So the quick settings for this one are, we're going to make it a follow and look at for the player, but it inherits all these settings, so you don't have to drag them into here. These ones will just inherit it from this one. So in the looking, the only thing we have to worry about is the body and aim settings. So the body is going to be a transposer, and it's going to be a simple follow with world up in this case, because we do actually have to follow the player from behind, so we are going to follow them. And the follow offset is going to be a negative 3.4, okay, and then it's going to be 0 on Z. So that's just going to be a little bit, you know, behind them. For the damping, we'll do 1 for Y, and for Z, we'll do 0.75. And again, you can tweak these settings later, and then for the aim, instead of composer, we're going to use same as follow target. And what that means is look in the same direction that the player is looking at, because the player is going to be the target. So look at the same direction that the player is looking at, and we want some damping here to make it like a little bit smoother. So we're going to do a damping of 1. Okay, and then in this case, we are going to add another extension camera offset. So this one is going to have its own unique offset because it's an over-the-shoulder camera. So this is going to be the over-the-shoulder offset. So in this one, we're going to put an offset of -2 in Z. Okay, and it sounds like the capsule collider may have been the issue. If that's happening, just remember, if you click on the player, I saw some comments about, you know, having some trouble moving around the level. So what's happening probably is, if this capsule collider is too low, it's actually already sticking in the floor. So you're getting caught, right? So what you can do is you can just go to the capsule collider, and again, these settings tend to work pretty well, so you might want to just use these ones. Center is X0, Y 0.89, Z 0. Radius is 0.25. And the height is 1.8. Those settings seem to work pretty well, but if you need to tweak those, you can always go into the collider and just make sure it's moved up higher than the floor, so you don't get caught in the floor right from the beginning. Okay, so now we have our 2 cameras set up, and so we just need to make sure that they're switching the way that we expect them to, right? So this one still looks like it's a little bit behind the player, you know, like a little bit more behind them than we want it to be. So let's see if we can, where we need to tweak. There's the follow offset. It should be good. Let's play this. All right, so now the player can move around. If you hold down Shift, you can sprint. Again, if you use your mouse wheel along with the keyboard WASD keys, you can control your walk speed to like a super sneak, and then to like a little bit of a faster one. And then if you push and hold down the right mouse button, you should get an over-the-shoulder cam, which is pretty cool. So now we have our cool over-the-shoulder cam, and it is transitioning between them too. So you get like this nice smooth transition. And then if you look in the scene view, what's really cool is you can see both of the virtual cameras. So the main camera, the real one, is white, and the virtual cameras are red. So you can see that both virtual cameras are there at the same time, and that's how it knows to transition between both of them. So it's actually really cool. And as I move around, you'll see that both of the virtual cameras are following. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. So we have our basic setup for the player, basic setup for the camera. So now what we need to do is we need to move ahead and build out our enemies and some of these things. So just so you guys know, this whole session goes until 4, but we are going to continue past 4, but the main meat of this is all going to go till 4, so we're going to get that in. And then if you guys want to stay a little bit later, we're going to do some polished things and dig into some other things about where you could go with it, how you could go even further with the game. So we are going to try to get our game loop in by 4 though, and because of that, we're going to speed up a little bit here. So I'm going to use a couple of shortcuts because our time is getting a little bit closer to 4. So here's what I recommend doing. If you followed along, this closely this far, great job, fantastic job. If you haven't followed along that closely, that's okay too, because I've created some prefabs for you that already have these settings built in. So if you're having any troubles with like getting the cameras just right and stuff like that, we actually have some prefabs in here that we can use. So if you go into your project assets prefabs folder, you can actually see that there are some different objects in here. There's that cube we made earlier, which was just for demo. We don't actually need that. And then you can see we have some other things in here. So we have a player prefab, which is all set up with his grab collider. And we also have some kits. So if you open up the kits have some bigger chunks of things that are all set up here. So what we're gonna do is, in case that was hard to follow along with some of the virtual camera stuff and you fell behind, you can just drag in this virtual state-driven camera and get rid of that other one and you're good to go. So just so you know. So we're gonna use some of these prefabs just to speed things up a little bit, but I am gonna explain them and I'm gonna explain how they work. So just so we don't have to spend time dialing in every little thing here. I know that can be a little bit annoying sometimes. So we're gonna use these little kits here and we're gonna make some a little bit faster if that's okay with you guys. Okay, cool. So the first thing is you can bring these kits in and everything's gonna be set up in the way that I was saying. However, you are going to need to do some of the hookup. So this follow and the look at and all that stuff, you're gonna wanna do that. So you are gonna wanna drag in the player and you're gonna wanna drag in, again, the player, and then you're gonna wanna drag in the player for follow, look at, and animated target. You can actually see that that's all following beautifully already because the main camera was tagged. It already has its Cinemachine brain. This is all working. And you can see that our scene is already set up. So we're nice and centered. We have our over-the-shoulder camera, and we also have grabbing, okay? Yeah, I know, Konami code. So that's a little bit faster, but if you want to dig into it, you'll actually see that all those settings were the same settings we were setting up. Again, if you got behind on the player and the player was causing you some issues like getting stuck in the ground, you can also just drag out this player prefab and you can just hook it up with this and you'll be good to go. But if you're cheating and using player prefabs instead of using what we all fought to make, you're just gonna get a normal little gray cube. Sorry, you don't get a PIGSquad special edition cube. So we're gonna take the player and we're gonna put the player back to where the level should start, because we're gonna start building this level here. And you can actually see while I'm doing that, the camera is updating because Cinemachine is awesome. So I'm gonna start him in the foyer, the lobby, the foyer, kind of a little Fred Meyers kind of a look here. And then now we need to build out our level here. So I don't want to spend time dragging everything into place. You guys can have fun doing that, and I think it is actually a lot of fun to do level building, but I didn't want to like do too much level building. Like I said, there is going to be a talk today as well about level building and using ProBuilder to do that. So we're just going to use the kits. So if you look at the props kit and you drag that into your scene, plonk, whoa, look at all this stuff. So we have all of our props all set up right here. Yeah, okay, exactly. Oh, tomorrow. Yeah, so Dylan said tomorrow we're going to be doing, Wes is going to be doing the ProBuilder session, and that's going to be great too. But this is just going to be bringing in the kit and being done with it. So this is everything. You can see though that it's the wrong orientation, so we're going to need to size and scale this into place. I don't know why it came in with this weird scale, but you can actually see that it came in with a 90-degree rotation, which we need to zero out, and it came in with a 1.25, 1.2. I don't know why. That's weird. But just right-click on Transform, click Reset, and look at that. Just like that, it's done. You're done. So we have all of our registers. We have some Amazon lockers in the side here. We have some shopping carts lying around, and we have shelves ready to go. And by the way, these are all just, oh yeah, and we even have potted plants at the entryway with our, our carts. So these already have colliders on them, as you can actually see. So you're going to be able to collide with them, so you won't be able to pass through them. And it's all set up and ready to go. So if you play this scene now, you'll see a much more complete level. You'll see that we'll run into the carts here, so we're not going to pierce those things. And then when we go to the grocery area, you can see we can already collide with these. So now our aisles are all set up and ready to go. So this is something that is all based off of free assets. These are all free assets that I just found on the asset store, so you can just grab these. And again, most of them are modular. So if you want to build out your own level, they already have their colliders and stuff attached. So feel free to go and make this level unique and make it your own level. We're going to move ahead and we're going to get these enemies in here. And so you can see there's a ton of stuff in these props. So really good to keep this in its own folder, all locked up, so you don't have to worry about that. And I would recommend that you drag and drop the props into the level asset so that this could be, you know, a little bit more clean. All the level stuff can go in the level. The player could actually go in the level, but since the player is so useful, let's just leave it out for now. But everything can go in the level. All right, so now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to grab in and drag in the game controller prefab. So the game controller is a really important thing. It's a manager. So it's an empty game object, and all it has on it is the brains, and it runs the show. So one of the things about prototyping and actually just making game, I'm actually going to drag it to the top because it is running the show here. I like to put my logic stuff at the top and then level stuff below, but that's up to you. Now you can see it's tagged as game controller, so that's important. And then it has a game controller script that I made for you guys, and basically it's just asking for a few things to get dragged into here, right? So we haven't created the enemies yet, so we can't drag that stuff in yet, but we will in just a little bit. But it basically has all the basic features that allow the game to run. And what can be really confusing in a game is like, well, if I shoot something with a bullet, should the bullet sense that it hit something, or should the wall sense that it got shot? And those kind of confusing questions just get more and more and more complicated. And if you don't establish some rules for yourself early on, what happens is you end up kind of doing some of both. So in this situation, it's that way, and in this other situation, it's the other way. And then it just gets to this like tangled wires situation where it's really hard to like tell like what's communicating what to what when. Really hard to figure your game out. So that's where a manager comes in. So the game controller is like the manager. Everybody reports to the game controller, and they tell the game controller the important things that have happened. And the game controller gets to decide what to do with it. So there's one place where all the important things in the game, like did you win, did you lose, like the player's object shouldn't decide if he lost, right? All he should say is I grabbed the TP, and he tells that to the game controller. The game controller looks at all the other things that are going on and decides like, okay, yeah, you won, right? So that's really useful in terms of like hierarchy here. So the game controller here is a pretty simple one, but I still recommend using it. So it has some text for the UI in messages that we can type in, and it has a debug mode. So the debug mode is already really cool. So if I turn on the debug mode, I'll be able to see these debug shapes, and then if I turn it off and I start the game, even though I'll turn it on. Even though well, we haven't hooked these objects in yet, but once we do, even though I'm creating those colliders in the scene, I'm going to be hiding all of their meshes in the debug, so that when I'm in debug mode, I can see everything. I can see these, these boxes that are glowing, so it's easy to see what's happening and what people are sensing and what they're doing. But then when I have the real game, I'll just turn that off and they'll all just go away. So it's great to build that into the game controller. But let's leave debug mode on for now because we want to see this. Okay, so we need TP and we need enemies. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our toilet paper object, right? So that's pretty good. And even better, I'm going to actually delete this one and go into our kits, and I'm going to grab out collectibles. So grab out collectibles and drop that in your scene. And again, look at this. It's all coming in weird. I don't know why these prefabs got saved with some weird stuff. So when you bring in one of these prefabs, just right click on the transform and click reset, and then it's going to go where it should. So let's grab that into the level because collectibles is part of the level, and you'll see that something interesting happened. So under collectibles, let's look at this. Collectibles is just an empty game object. Collectibles is got nothing. It's just a folder to collect things together. So the only thing that matter is this one, the toilet paper prefab. So let's press F to focus on it. look at that. I found a free toilet paper model, and it's pretty rad, I think. So this TP is the collectible. This is how you win the game, and it's really simple setup. All we have is we have the toilet paper itself, and then it has this toilet paper mesh, and then it has a collider. It's got a sphere collider so that you can grab it from any angle instead of a cube one. You could use a cube one though. And it's got a rigid body. And the reason it's got a rigid body is because if it doesn't have a rigid body, it won't react to physics and we won't be able to grab it. But if you're getting, I'm getting a question here about dragging the kits in and getting clones instead of blue cubes. So if you grab a prefab and just left click drag it, the default behavior is to bring it in as a prefab. But if you're in play mode, it may be bringing it in as an instance. So that's a good thing that and Boffin just pointed out. So if you're in play mode, just make sure you stop play mode before you drag in the object. Yeah, I know. Sometimes it's hard to tell because my screen goes dark, but you can actually change this color, and sometimes you don't see that you're in play mode. So if you're getting something weird with your prefabs, just make sure you're not in play mode when you're dragging objects in. And then when you leave, yeah, I know, a little bit of work. Well, just to make things easier for you, Peter, just remember, we're going to drag and drop the state-driven camera from the kits. We're going to drag and drop the collectibles from the kits, and we're going to drag and drop the props from the kit. So that's what we've done so far. And all of these, if they come in with a weird angle on them when you drag them in, just like, so if I drag in the collectibles and it comes in with a weird transform and all that, just right click on it and click reset and you're good to go. Okay, so we're gonna drag and drop that into this view. And you can see that in the toilet paper, again, there's nothing special, just as a sphere collider and a rigid body. But in this case, we put it to kinematic. So kinematic in a rigid body means that I'm going to control the movement. So don't like drop it with gravity. And you can see I've actually unchecked gravity. So we don't actually want it to have gravity and stuff like that because we don't want you to be able to knock it over. But we do want to be able to interact with it because that's how we can sense it. So we are going to have a rigid body. We're just going to make it kinematic and not use gravity. So good to go. Great. Okay, I'm glad you got back into shape. All right, great. So that's our toilet paper. But we also have a great one here, which is called TP spawn points. So you can see these spawn points are just little spheres. If I open up the spawn points, this is again just an empty game object. And then you can see there's little prefabs in here, and they're all little spawn points. And these are really easy. There's nothing special about them. They're just debugs. So they've got a debug shader on them, just so we can see them. And then that's it. There's nothing. There's no collider. There's nothing. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the positions of all these little points as possible locations where the TP could spawn. And this is how we're controlling spawning. So there's so many cool things about Unity, but one of the best ones is using objects as like a reference point. So you don't need anything special. What we're going to do is at the start of the level, we're just going to randomly choose one of these points, and then we're going to move the TP to that, and then we're going to hide all the points. So this is like great. So when we go to our game controller, we need to drag these two things in here. So it's asking for this, the TP. So let's drag the TP in there. So a reference to our toilet paper. And then we also need a TP spawn points parent. So that's this top one here, just the top parent. Okay. So now this is really cool. When we press play, you're going to see that the toilet paper disappeared. And if you click on it, now I am in play mode, be careful. So I'm in play mode and I clicked on the toilet paper in my scene, and then I'm going to press F, which to focus on it. And if you rotate around there, you can see, oh, it chose this side. So it threw the toilet paper here. But if you click out of play mode and click play mode again, you'll see that it chose a new spot. So it's randomly choosing one of these points. And you can see all these points are here right now because we have debug mode checked on. But if you go to the game controller and check off debug mode and then click play, you'll see that it'll hide all of our spots. So it's going to place the toilet paper in a random location and hide all the spots. So if you want to adjust this, just go into those TP spawn points and go wild. You can make this toilet paper appear anywhere you want. You can make it appear on the ground, or you can make it appear on the floor or whatever, or on a different shelf. This is just the base setup for you, but you can create more of these spawn points. As long as these spawn points are inside this parent, you can create as many of them as you want. So you could hide it in the bush at the beginning if you want to. It's totally up to you. Yeah, so that's cool, huh? All right, so now that we have the props, which is again like kind of just the level props, and we have these collectibles, and that's all set up, the next thing to do is to get our enemies in. Now I know what I said. It is 4 p.m. now, so technically the meat of this talk is kind of winding down, but we didn't get quite all the way to a game loop. So if you can hang around, I'd love to keep you guys here. I am going to keep going, and we're going to go through that whole game loop. So if you guys want to stay around, please do. If you have to go, just know we are recording this, so you can come back later and you can watch the recording and finish it out. So I'm sorry about the time. It's a little bit hard to pack so much info in 2 hours. But yeah, hopefully you guys have some water in front of you and you can take a little water break, and then we will dive in here and finish this off. So we have the basic level. We actually have a game. We can walk around. The toilet paper appears someone randomly, so it's always a little bit of a challenge, and we can find it and we can grab it. So let's make sure that that works. So the game controller is aware of the toilet paper. Okay, I'm going to turn debug back on, by the way, because it's useful while we're doing this. The camera works, and the level has the toilet paper in it. So let's see if this works. Excuse me. So game play mode, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to look for my toilet paper. Let's see where he is. Okay, great. So I'm going to come in here, and let's see where the toilet paper went. It's hiding somewhere. And you'll notice that if you hold down right click while you're in this mode, hey Jens, welcome, welcome. So while you're in this mode, if you press left and right, you strafe. So you're like, it's like a strafe mode. So that's pretty cool. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna see if I can find that toilet paper, and it's where one of these green dots can be. So let's see, you guys see it? Let's see, where is it? I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna cheat, you guys, sorry. So under collectibles, I'm just gonna click on toilet paper in the scene. Oh, look, there it is, I found it. So, okay, so back to my game view, you can see it's on this shelf right around here on the other side. Okay, great. So there it is, there's the TP. So I'm gonna grab it, and ding, I won. But no, I didn't, because we haven't set up that final state. We haven't set up the UI. So in this time, what we wanna do is, for our complete loop, we have to have a fail and a win. So we're going to have enemies for the fail, but for the win, let's get that hooked up so you can win. And how are we going to tell the player? So of course you could go to the next level. You could do play some music. You could do some other things like that. But for this game, we're going to keep things simple, and we're just going to tell you a message. We're just going to put some text on the screen that says, plonk, you won. Okay. So if you look at your project prefabs kits folder, and you see the UI, you can drag that out there. So drag out the UI, and you can immediately see it brought up our title screen, the last TP. And now UI is kind of like game logic, so I'm going to bring that kind of to the top of the screen here. So I'm going to try to keep my level down here, and my UI and my logic and all that stuff up here. So under UI, you can actually see that it's like the simplest kind of UI. So if you wanted to create this from scratch, all you would do is you would say plus UI, and then you would say, I think it's just a panel or a canvas. It's canvas. So just go to plus UI canvas. That's what all I've done there. Okay. But then so this canvas handles the screen size and all that stuff. Then under there, I've just gone plus UI text. That's it. Just a text object. And then in that text, you can see that I've written out some sizes and stuff, but this text is actually controlled by our game controller. So you don't have to worry about the UI. So if you just drag out the UI into the scene, that's hooked up to the game controller. So the game controller has 3 messages that we've defined. It has a start game text, a win game, and a lose game. So we can get our win state and our fail state. So the last TP is going to be our quote unquote title screen, and we're just keeping things simple. So it's all in one scene. You know, you're not scene switching, it's just one scene. And actually, if you notice, what happens is it puts it on the screen for a few seconds, and then it's letting me play even while it's there, and then it'll just disappear in a few seconds once we hook this up. So it's not hooked up because in our game controller, we have a UI game text object that it's waiting for, see? So we're just going to open up our UI, take that game text object, drag it in there, let go, Now we're all hooked up. So now the game controller understands about our UI. So now when we play it, go into play mode, you can see that we'll get our title screen, and then it'll disappear after a couple of seconds. So that's how we're doing our intro. It's super simple, but it's effective. It works. And then now we have our win game and lose game text. So the lose game will be if you get caught, of course. I'm going to cheat again, clicking. Okay, so the toilet paper's in the back here, see? All right, so I'm going to go get it. So let's go run in there. Oh, there it is. Okay, toilet paper. Oh, it's on the other side. Okay. Boom. So why can't we get it? So there's just one more hookup we have to do, which is we have told the game controller what messages are that it's supposed to play once you catch it, but we haven't hooked up the player to let it know what is what's going on here. So with the player selected, and sorry, I just realized something. In our basic behavior, once we set up the cameras, we actually never did this. So if you're getting a little bit of strange motion that on your shoulder camera, that makes sense because we never dragged it in here. So the look camera and the player camera should actually be attached to these cameras. So if I put the VCam looking as my look camera, right, and the VCam main as my main camera, that's actually what should be on our basic behavior script. I just forgot to go back to the player and hook those up. So if you want to hook those up, our over-the-shoulder camera should actually be working better now. It may have not been looking in the direction you were pointing before, and now it's looking in the direction that you're pointing. So actually this one, the look camera needs to be the look camera, but the player camera could probably stay the main one. Okay. So looking around. Great, so now it looks in the direction that I look. See, so now it always looks the direction I'm looking. So that's great. And sorry, just to confirm, the look camera should be the VCam looking, but the player camera should just be the main camera, because that's the camera we've marked as main camera. Okay, so now that's all hooked up there. So now we just need to hook up the ability to grab the toilet paper, connect that to our winning, and then we need to get the enemies in so that you can lose. So let's get those enemies in so you can get our win state and our fail state together. So there's a couple of things that are already in prefab, so we're just gonna drag these in and make it a little bit easier. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to kits and we'll grab our enemies kit. We'll drag that in. Again, I don't know why these are coming in with strange transforms, but just right click on the transform and click reset. And you can see that those enemies will appear in your scene. And then the enemies can be outside the level, but they're kind of part of the level too. So I'll just drag them in the level. And you can see I have two enemies here, but the enemies under prefab are the same prefab. So we were talking about prefabs at the beginning. This is just the same prefab dragged twice. So if you wanted 3 enemies in your scene, you could just Control-D, duplicate, move this guy over. Now you got 3 enemies in your scene. So you could actually make this game super hard, just depending on how many enemies you want. Or if you just want 1 enemy, you know, remove him and you only have 1, and then the game is easier. So that's an easy way to adjust challenge here. So this enemies prefab, again, this top level one is just an empty folder. It's nothing, it's just an empty game object. These enemies are the actual things that are dealing with all of this, and they use NavMesh. So let me show you how to use NavMesh in Unity. It's really great, and it's really easy, and it works really well. And here's how it works. So make sure you're out of play mode and just in the normal scene. And in the enemy itself, the enemy is a pretty simple thing. It's set up exactly like our player was. So the player, remember, had an empty game object with all the logic and the colliders on it. And then inside it had the pig mesh, so it has like our mesh object, and we just leave that alone because we want to be able to swap that out. And then it also has this grab collider so we can sense what we grab, right? Okay, so then the next thing that an enemy needs is it has that exact same stuff. It has the empty game object on the top with the logic and the movement scripts. It has just a cube with some eyes on it so that you know where its face is. But this time it needs a couple of sensors. So it has a sensor, and this is its vision cone. So instead of doing some complicated math or whatever, we're just using, again, a box collider. So we're just creating a box. So I just said plus 3D object cube. We created a cube, and then I added one of those debug materials to it so it's easy to see. and then it's just a box collider. That's it. Now it has a little script on it though called check for player sighting, and this is the logic that tells it when the player gets into this little area, then that means that you saw them. So when you see them, you'll chase them. That's the logic. And then you're trying to catch them. So it also has a second sensor, which is the catcher. So it can see you before it can catch you. So if they see you, they might have just seen you from far away. But to actually get you, they have to catch you. So they have to bring you into this pink sphere for it to be a catch. And they have to catch you for them to beat you. Right? So technically they could see you and chase you, but you can still run away, because we wanted to have that fun in the game where like you could still win even if they saw you and they're chasing you and you're like, ah, right? So it's really similar to the player, just has one more sensor here. And again, the sensors are just created by making a mesh with the debug material on it so that we can hide it later when we turn off debug mode. And then it has the collider, and the collider is set to be a trigger because we don't want it to push objects, we just want it to sense them. So that trigger collider is a great way to sense objects. So you can see that the sensor has a script for sighting the player, and the catcher has a script for catching the player. But otherwise, it's a very simple little setup. So in our enemy here, it has an actual collider, and it needs its own collider because this is the collider it uses to bump into objects in the world. So this one is actually a collider, not a trigger. This one is just for bumping into things. And then it has this nav mesh agent. So if you just go to add component nav mesh, you'll see nav mesh agent and obstacle. Anything that's a nav mesh agent in Unity can be given AI for navigating a world. So this is like great. So the agent type is a humanoid type, which is the only type we have. And then there's a couple of settings here for like how fast they can move and how fast they can turn. But this is really, really basic. Okay, so the other thing it has on it is a custom script that I wrote for you guys, which is called nav agent move to. It's actually a very simple script for those of you that are interested in code. We're not doing it. We're not going into code in this tutorial, but you can go and open up these C# scripts and take a look at them to see how the logic is all set up if you're interested in that. And you can actually see that these enemies have a minimum wait time, a max wait time, a player sighted speed, and then the player transform. So you can see that it's expecting me to give this a player transform, so I need to give it that player transform. So if I can just drag the player in there, you can see that they need to have a reference to the player so that they know who the player is, right? Now, the other thing that's really cool is that this minimum wait time and maximum wait time is how much they'll wait around like as they're patrolling. So they'll like patrol to somewhere random, hang around for a little bit, and then they'll patrol to somewhere else and then hang out a little bit, and then they'll patrol to somewhere else. So that's kind of how they work. And you can see they have this goals check, and if you check that down, you can see that there's all these different goals in here. So we'll look at goals in just a second, but the goals are going to be similar to how we did the random spawning for the toilet paper. We're going to do objects in the scene that just act as goals, and then those enemies will use those goals to move around. So what we're going to do is I've set up a little kit for you already. You can do this very easily because, as you could see before, these are literally just these TP ones. They're just spheres that have debug material on them just to make them kind of easier to see, but that's it. There's nothing, there's no code on them, there's nothing. We're just using them as a reference for the position. So if you go back to your kits, you can see there's an enemy goals kit, and if you drag that into the scene, again, every one of these prefabs might have gotten saved a little bit wrong, so I apologize for that, but right click on transform and click reset, and you can see, boing, there they are. They're all in the right place. So these are also part of the level, so I'll just pop them into level. So you can see enemies and enemy goals. And these enemy goals, again, if I look at an enemy goal, what is it? It is literally just a sphere that has a pink material on it. It's nothing special, literally just nothing. The only thing that makes these special is that we're gonna say that they're special. So this is up to you. I've put some points around the map where they will patrol, and then when they get to these points, they'll hang out at those little zones for a certain amount of time. But you can move these around. So if you want them to patrol into certain areas or more areas, you can just Control D and duplicate this. As long as they're inside this enemy goals folder, you can add as many as you want, and you can add them wherever you want. You can even have one like over here if you really want to scare the player. But right now I'm kind of containing them to this area. So that's totally up to you. Feel free to move around those and play with those. So the way that this works is I have all these goals here, and then I have my enemy. And if I click on the enemy and I open up the goals, you can see I can number the size of goals. So I can say, oh, okay, there's 12 different goals here. Now this is a little painstaking, and I could have automated this in script, but I wanted to show you an easy way to do it without having to know how to do scripting and stuff. If you just create all the goals, then all you have to do is drag and drop them. So it's a little painstaking because you got to drag and drop all of them, but you only have to do it once. Okay, so just drag and drop all these little goals in here from the enemy goals bin to the enemy goals bin. So that was 5. There's that one, and just keep going, keep going, keep going. You're almost there. It could be worse. Oh, we did it. It's done. Okay, so now you don't have to worry about that. And that's a great way that you can use an object that isn't special, but use it in a special way to give you something cool. So you can see these are prefabs, but this prefab didn't come in with those goals. So like, do I have to drag all those again? No, don't. That's too annoying. Just delete this guy, and I'll just delete him. And then I'm just gonna come back here, and I'm gonna create another one. I'm gonna Control D on this enemy, and I'm gonna drag him where I want to, so that he just starts in. So there's 2 enemies now, and they both have all their references. Look, see? Ah, I didn't have to do it again. Okay, so you can always cheat. You can cheat. All right, so now the enemies have their goals. They can path, they are ready to be able to path, and they have all their goals for their logic, but what they don't have is they don't have navigation set up. So the way to set up navigation in Unity is in the navigation tab. If you don't see the navigation tab, go to Window, AI, Navigation, okay? And go over to the navigation tab, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through, there's agents, areas, bake, and then object. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to agents, and all of these default settings should work fine. I'm just using a radius of 0.5, a height of 2, and a step height of 0.75, but there's no height in this, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is really basic. And then for areas, I'm leaving that alone. I'm not doing anything, 100% default. And then bake. So this is the important one. So agent radius, agent height, max slope, you can see all that stuff is in there. So I'm just using those settings I just said. And then I'm leaving this at 0. And then if you open up advanced, I'm doing nothing. So it's like as easy as it can be. And what I'm doing is I'm just clicking bake. And when you click bake, what you'll see is this blue mesh will appear over your scene. And the light blue means those are areas that the enemies can navigate. And then the areas where you don't see mesh means they can't navigate there. So what's actually happening is the baker is seeing all the objects in the scene with colliders and stuff, and it's baking around them to avoid them. So you can actually see that these enemies are able to walk anywhere basically that the player can walk, but they will not walk everywhere. They will only walk in the areas that you've put all these little patrol nodes in. So even though they can navigate anywhere, they're also going to follow the AI that we gave them to follow these nodes. So they're going to navigate from position to position. So they're kind of like half smart, right? Like, so if this guy wants to go from this node to this node, he's smart enough to get around this pole. So he might go around the pole to the left, he might go around the pole to the right, but he's always going to go from this node to this node. So he's never going to like come past the cash register unless I put a node there. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So navigation mesh baking is really easy in Unity, so it's really cool. If you ever mess it up, you can just click bake again and it'll rebake it and it'll come back. And it's actually stored on your computer as an asset. The nav bake will be stored in the scene that you're working on. So you can see in finished game there's a nav mesh here that we made, and that's the mesh. If you're in start here and you click it, it'll make a start here folder and it'll show the nav mesh bake. So it's actually really cool. Now, one thing to know about nav mesh is that how does it know which objects to, like here, right? How does it know which objects to do that to carve around? The way that it does that is if you click on an object and you go to the inspector and you go to the top, there's this little static checkbox. but actually there's a lot of different kinds of static. So it's better to click on this little down arrow and you can actually see there's all these different statics. The only one we care about is this one, navigation static. So if you enable an object to be navigation static, what that means is that when you do the navigation bake, it'll use that object as a bake point, as like something to bake around. So all of these objects that you see that have like something carved around them, I've gone in and I've just it's a prefab, so it's shared. So in the prefab, I've just gone open prefab, go to the static, you know, make sure it's like navigation static, and then you're good to go. And you could also just shift select and do that static and everything is navigation static. So that's how you define what is going to get baked. But now that you have the bake, hopefully that all went well. This should work. So the navigation guys, the enemies, they have a navigation agent, a navmesh agent, which is going to use that bake navigation that we made with the settings. And then they have their nav agent move to, and they know about the player, and they have their goals. So let's see what happens. So I'm just going to look around in the scene view, and what happens? Whoa, this guy's moving. So he's picked a node, and he's going to go, and there he is. Now he come to a stop. This guy's picked his node, and then they're going to wait and see. They know how to navigate around each other, and they know how to navigate to where they need to go. And they're going to wait in those spots for a random amount of time, but it's based on the time that they have here. So there's a min wait time and a max wait time. Now the cool thing is I can go to this enemy and I can say his min wait time is 3 and his max wait time is 12. And this guy is like, maybe he's a little slower, you know, he like didn't have his coffee this morning. So like each of your enemies can actually have an override. You can see it's bold because it's an override, so that the enemies can actually have their own speeds that they wait and patrol. And then also I gave them both the same goals. So both of these enemies can go anywhere in the level right now, wherever these dots are. But I could actually say only give one guy 6 on this half and the other guy 6 on this half, and then they would stay on their sides. So you could actually zone these enemies out. So feel free to play with that and kind of decide how you want to do that. But you could really orchestrate this. You know, you could have just 2 or 3 nodes in one aisle, and one enemy could just patrol that aisle. You know, like that's all that he does. He just patrols one aisle. So you can set up behaviors with this system. And I think that's pretty cool. So it's a simple system, but it's flexible. All right, so now we have our enemies. Our enemies should be able to sense the player because our enemies have a reference to the player dragged in them. Okay, but now we need to go back to our game controller because the game controller needed to know about these enemies. The game controller needs to be aware of what state the enemies are in. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say the enemy's parent is enemies, so we're going to drag that in. And then the enemy goals parent is this enemy goals, and we're going to drag that in. Okay, so now we have the enemies, the enemy goals. We have all of our references set up here. We have our debug on, so it will leave all these dots on, so it makes them easy to see while we're playing. And we're gonna try our game out here. Let's see how far we've gotten and see what we're missing. So the last TP, so here we go. We've got our shoulder cam. Now we can see all the debugs because we've left the debugs on, so we can see their vision cones. And we know that when we go into their vision cone, they should start chasing us. Okay, so let's see if this guy knows that we exist. Let's see if he can find us. Oh, I got lucky. All right, let me go run up on this guy and get into his vision cone on purpose. All right, vision cone. Oh, he sees me. So I need to run, I need to run. Okay, so that's totally working. He's seeking me now. And as long as I stay out of his pink cone, I'm fine. But oh no, he's in the, he caught me. Okay, so, oh, he caught me. All right, now if you're in this state, I wanted a simple way to restart the game without having to press play and replay again, which is another part of the game loop. And in this case, it's just the escape key. So if you press the escape key, you get another round. So that's a simple way to do it. Of course, you could draw a button on the screen and have them push a button or click a button or whatever. But in this case, just pushing that escape key is going to pop you into another round of the game, and you can try to play. So we can lose. So we're doing pretty good there, but can we win? Let's make sure we can win. So we can lose. Yeah, so we got caught. We got caught. Great. So let's go and let's see if we can win. So let's open up the level, collectibles, toilet paper, and I'm going to just cheat to see where it is so I can, yeah, there we go. All right, so I'm going to try and get that toilet paper. All All right, and then I'm gonna see if I can do it without this guy catching me. Dang, he's right there. Okay, let's see if I can get it. So I'm gonna grab that TP. All right, so we're not grabbing the TP because we haven't lost it. We never hooked up the reference so that the player knows what he's grabbing. So we have our grab collider here. And by the way, if you're just coming in late and you didn't have time to make the player, I'm gonna actually make a prefab out of the pig itself because I like that pig. If you need to redo this player, you can just delete the player and you can drag in that player prefab that we had earlier. So that's just the player prefab, and that has everything that you should need. So there's our player again. But if you are starting over with the player, just keep in mind that you're gonna have to go to the game controller, the camera. You're gonna have to go to the camera and you're gonna have to drag the player in there. So the player is gonna have to go in there. That's good. And then you're gonna have to go to the main camera and drag the player in there where it says player. There's just a couple places where they need to know about the player. And then the enemies also need to know about the player. So just make sure if you are starting over and dragging that player in, that you drag this player back in all these references. But after you do that, then you should be able to get up and running real quick here. So let me just make sure we've tagged this guy. We've got his animator. We've got his, oh yeah, sorry. So on the basic behavior of the player, since this is a new player that I just dragged in, you'll need to drag in main camera for the player camera and VCam looking, which is under the CM state driven camera, to the look camera. Okay, so that we're looking at the player. All right, and then I guess we can put jump in there, but we don't need it. And then we should be able to move. So now we have the player. He's a plain gray cube now, but we have him and we have our grabbing. And then if you want that pig one back, if we made that at the beginning. That's kind of special. So if you didn't have a chance to make that, it was just a pink cube, just a bunch of pig cubes. But this is actually what I was talking about. So if you open up this prefab, we had the cube in here, and if we had added all the logic on the cube, then it would be hard to do this. But since we added all the logic on the top game object, just this empty game object, and we just let this be artwork, now it's actually really easy. We can just drag in new artwork. See, poink, so easy. And now we can replace this player's artwork with some cooler player's artwork, and it's easy to do. So now we got our PIGSquad pig, and he's got the artwork, and everything is good. So now we're going to see if we can find that TP. Collectibles, TP, there it is. Oh no, I got caught. I dropped my guard, you guys. Okay, so let me do that one more time, make sure I'm actually getting the TP, and then we should be good. So let me make sure, yeah, TP is dragged in there. Perfect. TP got all its colliders on. Great. Okay, fantastic. So that should be everything. Make sure that the toilet paper is got, yeah. Oh yeah, so there's one thing here that looks like it was a little bit off. Sorry about that, you guys. I was wondering why we couldn't grab it. It's because this is not marked as a trigger in the prefab. That is totally just because I was making these prefabs too quickly, so I apologize for that. But if you look at the toilet paper game object, just make sure that in the sphere collider trigger is selected, because we use triggers whenever we want to sense something, but we use colliders with not trigger whenever we want to like smash into something and push it away. So we didn't have it marked as a trigger, so that's no good. Just make sure that the toilet paper does have it marked as a trigger so we can grab it. Now we should be able to grab it. So let's take a look at this. Again, if I click on the toilet paper and then in scene view press F, I can totally cheat while I'm debugging and find out that the toilet paper is on the left side here. So let's go take a look at it. All right, come on. Okay, so it's over there. I gotta get there without these guys catching me. Oh, dangerous. Okay. Ooh. All right, sneaking. All right, I'm sneaking. Come on, hurry. All right, so where's our toilet? There it is. Can I get it? God, TP for the win. Woo! All right, so that is the whole game loop. And actually, you can see at the end of this game loop, when we do win, we also turn off the movement of the bad guys so they don't catch you after the fact, right? So that's pretty good. So again, press escape if you want to do another game loop. But that is now our entire game loop. I know we went about a half an hour over the original scheduled time, but hopefully you guys were able to stay and stay along. To grab, it's going to be left mouse click. And to I'm seeing a question in the chat. So to grab, it's left mouse click, and it's right mouse click and hold down the right mouse click to do the over the shoulder zoom. Now that you can change though, because that's all set up in your input settings. So if you go to edit, project settings, input manager, in the input manager, we've set up a grab button, and the grab button is going to be whatever you put here. So right now it's mouse 0. Mouse 0 is left mouse click. But if you wanted to make this a different key, all you have to do is type in a different thing here. So, you know, K, if you want to grab with K. And if you want it to be a controller button, you can actually do that too. You can see there's you can, it looks like this doesn't have it defined, but if you go to a joystick axis, you can get an axis. And if you do a key or button press, you can name the joystick button. And there's references for that online. If you just type in like Unity input PS3 controller or whatever, you can find out the button mappings for those things. But basically, you can type in that, and then you could hook in a PS3 controller, and you could control it with that and do the grab with that. Just so you know, it's already set up for the analog sticks, so it's already set up to work. It depends what controller. It's already set up to work for you, so it'll already work. It's just it depends what controller you plug in. Like if you plug in a PS4 controller, it might be different than a PS3 controller in terms of the mapping. So I'm not sure exactly what button it'll be, but it'll be one of those buttons. Great question. So we've got a question about changing the screen color when you're in play mode. So you might notice that when I click play mode, my screen darkens. You can actually also have it turn like green or red. Some people make it turn like dark red so that you don't get trapped, you know, like you're actually in play mode, but you're making edits, because that can cause, you know, trouble when you stop play mode, then all the edits you made go away, right? So if you go into your preferences, I believe it's in preferences. Let me see really quick. These are Cinemachine colors. So if you go into preferences colors, you can see there's actually, you can define the colors for all kinds of things. And there's a play mode tint color. So if you look for that play mode tint color, you can see that mine is tinted to a dark gray. That's what I prefer, just makes it obvious. But if you wanted to, you could put this to like, you know, PIGSquad pink. And then when you go into play mode, your eyes will start bleeding. Okay, so this is actually sometimes helpful because, you know, if you make it a color like this, you're not going to accidentally do anything to the scene. You might go colorblind though. So that's where that is. Great question. So this is our basic game loop, and that is the meat of our time. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Peter. We aren't going to go too much further, but I am going to spend the next maybe 15 to 20 minutes for people that want to. This is the whole game loop, and also I think we've looked at enough things where you could customize it. You know, based on what we've gone through today, you could customize the level, you could customize the layout, you can customize the spawn points, you can customize the patrol points. You can customize how many enemies there are. You can customize your camera settings for setting the things to different angles. So essentially you could build multiple levels. You could build out a whole game already, right? You could build out a huge sprawling Fred Meyers that you have to get, you know, find this TP in, which would make the challenge a lot higher. But I did want to show you a couple of ways to like, okay, this is a great prototype. We have a playable game in one scene that tells the user what's going on. It has text, it has a title screen, it has a win state, it has a lose state. It's actually fun. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. I actually think it's pretty fun, and it gives you a little bit of what a sneak game should give you, which is like, oh no, they're gonna get me, right? Which is probably how we all feel looking for TP in real life these days. Anyway. refreshing. So, but the last thing I just want to do in these last kind of 15 minutes here is I wanted to show you how you could take this from a really nice prototype, which honestly is good enough to be a game if you just polished up some textures and things, maybe put some lighting and stuff in here. And if you wanted to take it further than that, what kinds of things could you do that I really recommend avoiding doing when you're starting making the game, but now that it's a working game, like, yeah, let's go willy-nilly. So first of all, thing to keep in mind is that when we were playing the game, we had debug mode on, so all these little dots and spheres and things were still going, right? The game is a lot scarier if you turn debug mode off, because you'll see that the sensors are not visible to you anymore. So you don't actually know what their vision cone is, you know? So now they're just like intelligent enemies, and to you, that's scarier probably, right? Like as a player, you're like, you know that they're looking for you and you know that they can find you, but you don't know the exact parameters of how far they can see and so on. So as the game designer, you can be adjusting, you can adjust their vision code, and you can make it shorter or longer to decide how hard you want to make things. But what's cool about this is I just see the guy coming from me, like, oh my gosh, did he see me? You know, and then okay, he didn't. But then, you know, that vision cone is there. So if he sees me, oh no, he saw me. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh, right? So that's the fun of that. So I really like this. Now this does involve coding, but I do really like having a game controller with a debug mode that you can control right there, because it makes the game really easy to work on and then have fun in. But now that we've got that all hooked up, you can change the messages here too. In the game controller, if you change these messages, they'll be updated here. So, is it a TP? And if I change that, that's now the title of our game. Now it's a different, you know, it's a different game. Oh, I guess it'll happen when it starts the next round. I might need to change that code. But then the win and lose text will change immediately. I need to edit that code. I guess it only does it on game loop reset, which I should have fixed. But anyway, these ones will work immediately. So TP for the win and caught, those will get updated as soon as you type them in here. And if you want to change the title, I guess you can always just change it directly. It's right in here. TP, TP, TP. So you can always change the title here if you'd like to. Now, the last thing that I have in your kits is, you might have noticed this if anyone was clever enough, there's an interactables and a post-processing volume. So first one is the funnest, so let's just grab this. If you drag and drop interactables, again, it's going to come in with weird orientation. So if you just right click on transform, click reset, you'll see that I've stocked the shelves for you with ramens and chips and sodas and all the fun things. So I have stocked these shelves, but even better, I have taken the liberty of, I'm going to drag this into the level because it's pretty much part of the level. I've taken the liberty of taking all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of objects and giving them colliders and rigid bodies with gravity. So, if you start this level, you might notice the following, which is exactly what I like. So, this is like people have already gone and hoarded the grocery store. And so this is like the kind of thing that you might want to get sucked into early on, you know, like, and do this before you've built a game. Like, what if I put like all these fun physics and blah, blah, blah. I really, really urge you to leave this fun stuff till later on when you have a game loop, because this is exactly what I said kind of at the beginning of this talk, where if you don't build your game loop first and you let yourself get sidetracked, it's fun. I mean, you'll have fun, but the problem is, like, weeks can go by and you'll never have a game, and then you can kind of get discouraged. So I really recommend building out your prototype, making a fun game, getting there quick. And then when you start to add this stuff, instead of being just complexity that's like unneeded complexity that's in the way of your game, it's fun, right? Now this is just like eye candy, but it adds a little bit to the game because it makes it a little bit harder to find the toilet paper roll, right? Like, it's harder to see now because there's all this stuff. So, I actually see it. Oh, do you guys see it? I see it. I'm gonna get it. Oh no, there's a guy. Okay, let's see if I can get it. It's right here. Oh yeah, I think I'm in the clear. Oh yeah, TP for the win. All right, so that is the kind of thing that I would recommend doing later on when you want to build in complexity. And you can see that by keeping this in its own folder and by keeping this as a totally separate thing, I am able to not ruin the prototype of my game. So I can always turn it off. I can always turn it on. It adds, you know, like a level of polish. That's nice, but you don't need it, right? Like you don't need it for the game to work. So I really, really, really recommend trying to build your prototypes and keeping focused on them. And then when you're like, yeah, this is fun, this is a good game, then you start doing all this polish stuff. Now, the second polish thing is rendering. So again, this is the exact same thing where like you can get so involved in like, because Unity is incredible with like lighting and realistic rendering and rendering pipelines and materials and blah, blah, blah. And like, but you know, that actually won't make your game fun, right? Like you can't cover up a not fun game. Like we all know this. You can't make a not fun game fun by making the graphics good. You just can't. So if you make the game fun and you focus on that first, then you start to bring those stuff in, yeah, it can get really cool. So here's an easy way that we can level up the view, the look, and we'll actually do this in the game view. And that's this post-processing volume kit. So if you bring in this post-processing volume kit, this is not part of our level. This is like part of the logic. So I'm going to bring this higher up in here. And this has the post-processing stack. So if most Unity, if you just start into Unity, it has the post-processing natively now. But if you don't, like older versions of Unity and stuff, again, if you go into Window Package Manager, this is a thing in Package Manager. So I typed in Cinemachine, so I can only find that. But if you type in post-process, you'll see that this whole post-processing stack is something that you can get from Package Manager. So if for whatever reason you don't have this in your project, you can always import it in your project. But it usually comes in there automatically these days. So now that I have post-processing, there's two things you need for post-processing to work. You need a post-processing volume, and you need a post-processing effect on your camera, a post-processing layer, that's called. So what we have here in the prefab is your post-process volume. So you're all set up. I've even gotten you the actual profile, so you're all ready to go. But then on your main camera, you're going to have to add that layer. So if you click Add Component and type Post-Process, you'll see Layer and Volume. You want the layer. So click on Layer, and it's going to make this camera part of its layer. Now, you can see that right now, though, the post-processing layer is set to nothing. And we don't want that. We want it set to post-processing. Okay, so we made a post-processing layer just for this, and that was in the layers panel. So I already created that one for you, but it's nice to have a separate layer for post-processing. In fact, they'll even give you a warning. If you say everything, it'll say, do not use everything. I have to think so much. Don't hurt me. So just make it post-processing and only post-processing. And you can see immediately what the effect that's created. So if I turn it on and off, so you can see, maybe I'll zoom in here so you can really see it, but you can see on the edge of the pig, we got some bloom, we got some color grading, we got some blur, we got some camera blur and camera motion blur and stuff. So now when we play the game, it's actually going to look pretty cool, even though it's quite simple. So look at the difference here, right? So here's the game. Oh, that's so eye bleed. So here's the game. Looks, I mean, it's fine for a prototype, looks cool, but the colors are a little bit like blah, and there's no motion blur and stuff. So now I turn this on, poing, now look at this. I have motion blur on my camera, which looks rad. There's bloom and on the pig, so when you go into the light, you get glows and blooms, and then we're color grading it to kind of feel cold and sort of scary. And so that is pretty much night and day, and that's just one little thing using the post-processing stack. So that is a really cool way that you can level up your graphics in your game. But again, I really recommend doing this stuff last, like as a polish pass, not letting it get in the way of you finishing your game, right? Whatever your game's gonna be, just get the prototype out first. You're gonna feel a lot better about it. I think, I feel a lot better about it when I'm like done, and then I'm adding this polish stuff. I'm like, it's just getting better. So if you are interested in what is actually going on in here, you can look at this post-processing volume, which has all the stuff on it. You can see we're doing a depth of field, an ambient occlusion, we're doing a vignette, which is like on the edge of the screen, we're doing motion blur, we're doing bloom, we're doing color grading, we're going nuts. We're doing all kinds of stuff. And color grading, if you're not used to it, it's really cool if you use these trackballs. You have to turn them on, and then you can use them. And then what will happen is if they'll track like towards that color, but also how far you pull it is how strong it is. So I'm tracking the gain towards green in this case. Or you could track the lift or the gamma. And you can get really beautiful like Wild West or subtle looks or cyberpunk or DSAT. You can get really cool effects using these ways. And of course, contrast too is another great one. So if I wanted it to be like a really deep shadow film noir kind of game, I could just, you know, turn this contrast way up, and then like the game is going to feel really different and kind of like a little bit grittier, right? Oh no, I've got to go to the grocery store again. So anyway, that's how it is. I think that covers all the basic things that I wanted to cover. Like I said, we went a little bit past 2, but for everyone that stuck around, really appreciate it. I hope you got something that you enjoyed out of this. If you have any questions, I'm going to hang around in the chat for a little bit, so feel free to post them and I'll answer them. And also, this is going to be recorded. I mean, it was recorded, so there's going to be replays of this on the PIGSquad channel, so be sure to check it out. And if you did go through this tutorial, if you end up making your own game, making some cool tweak to this, modding the game, please share it with PIGSquad community. That would be awesome to see. You could share it on the Discord channel, you could share it on Twitch, you could share it on any of the other channels that PIGSquad runs. It's really good to see what everyone makes, and I think it makes everyone just kind of like, it gets everyone sort of pumped up to do it themselves. So I really hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that there was something that you got out of that. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be able to present to you today. So thanks again for being here. This is PIGSquad, and this was The Last TP, how to make a game loop and focus on the building of the game before you let yourself go off into the weeds of all that fun extra stuff. And just for a last little Easter egg here, I don't know if any of you noticed this, but if you go into your prefabs, there is a fancy player prefab, and in that fancy player prefab, there is a fully hooked up, rigged and animated humanoid, and you can play this game with a human character if you want. So if you want to see how animation and all that hookup works, you can pull up Fancy Player, and you can play with Fancy Player. So if you guys are, in fact, let's do that. I mean, I like the pig, but I'm gonna just bring Fancy Player in here real quick, and I'm gonna bring out the skeleton and shadow mesh, which is the player, right? So I'm gonna grab skeleton and shadow mesh. I'm gonna grab those and put them in here in the player. And this is, again, exactly what I was talking about. Like, if we start with a cube, but we leave the cube alone and we don't put any logic here, then we don't have to worry about this stuff. Like, did you see how easy it was to replace the character, right? You start with an actual cube, then you get like a cool little, you know, low res version, and then you're like, man, I want to go hi-fi on this. You can totally do it, and you don't have to change any logic. You just switch out the player art. So I do think that's a really nice method. So now you can actually see we have a actual player character here, and it's an animated character. It's got root motion. You can see we've got a grab animation on it, and he's got his strafing animations, and you can start getting your Splinter Cell if that's where you want to go with this. So just keep in mind, start simple, and you can definitely build up to however complicated you want to. All right, cool. So I'm gonna shut down the stream here, and we'll get the recording up for you when we can. But again, thanks everyone for coming. It's been a real pleasure. I'm Daniel, and it's been The Last TP.